Alexithymia 101 is illustrative, helps you all understand a little bit about what's going on. The good news is that alexithymia is not set in stone. So there's some evidence that it kind of gets classified as a personality trait, but I've seen overwhelming clinical success in terms of like teaching people about their emotions. So even when it comes to addiction, I developed a meditation program for people who had addictions at McLean Hospital, where the focus of the meditation program was internal emotional awareness. Because I saw this sort of neuroscientific deficit, and we picked all of the meditations that will help people become emotionally aware. And what we see, as we started teaching people emotional awareness meditations, they started relapsing less. But for a brief period of time, they started feeling worse. They started acknowledging their negative emotions earlier, but then they could reach out for help. So made them feel a little bit emotionally worse in the short term, reduce relapses over the long term, and overall improve their mental health 1 year out. So the good news is that there is stuff that you can do about this. You just have to really understand that emotional awareness is a really, really key component, because it's like literally chunks of our brain are all devoted to our emotions. And if we don't really understand what those are or how to regulate them, it's going to cause all kinds of problems in our life. If you found this video helpful, check out Dr. K's guide. We spent hundreds of hours writing and filming to help people understand their mind so that they can build the lives that they want. So check out the link in the description below. Attachment is how we learn what we feel on the inside. So a child early on doesn't know what they're feeling, right? So if I'm an 18-month-old and I'm walking around and I stumble and fall, do I feel hurt? Should I panic or should I laugh? And if the adults in the room are terrified, oh my God, little Timmy fell down. And then the child starts crying. He's like, oh crap. Today what we're going to talk about is alexithymia. So alexithymia is the inability to experience your internal emotional state. And what I kind of view this as is almost like an emotional color blindness. So a lot of times what we don't really realize, but a lot of our problems actually come from an inability to experience our internal emotional state. We're not really aware of what we're feeling on the inside. And there's actually a lot of science that shows that being unaware of what you're feeling can lead to all kinds of problems. So alexithymia has been associated with problems with motivation and finding direction and purpose in life. So if you're someone who kind of like is going through life, but you're not really sure, you know, what's the point? Like you don't know why you're on this earth. You don't really, like you look around at other people and you see like, oh, these people are so motivated. Like they get up every day and they're striving for something. But I get up every day and it's just kind of like a haze, right? I don't know really why I'm here. I'm just sort of existing instead of living. And that's actually been tied to alexithymia. We also find that alexithymia is a common culprit in a lot of psychological problems. So leads to problems, or not leads to, but exacerbates problems like addiction. So people who are alexithymic are more prone to addiction. We'll even dive into a lot of my clinical experience with working with people with addiction, which I don't know if y'all have struggled with this yourself, or maybe you have a friend who will say, yeah, I was doing great. I was like sober for 6. Hey y'all, today we're going to talk about brain rot and how to fix it. When I was working full-time as a psychiatrist, I noticed that people would come into my office and they would be like cognitively not in the best headspace. They would be sort of very lethargic. They would have difficulty focusing, difficulty motivating themselves. They couldn't really find direction, and anything was kind of hard for them to do. So when I was working with these people, I would develop what's called a differential diagnosis, which is let's see if we can figure out why there's a lack of focus, why there's a lack of motivation, why there's so much lethargy and a lack of energy. And sometimes this would be due to something like a physical or a mental illness. And we've covered that elsewhere in the channel. Increasingly, I saw more and more what's called brain fog. So brain fog is like a neuroinflammatory condition that causes like cognitive problems. So people who will have really bad COVID will sometimes have this post-COVID syndrome that's characterized by brain fog. But that was sort of another sort of thing that we've also covered elsewhere. And by the way, apparently one of our best YouTube videos. So check it out if you think that that could be happening with you. Hey, just a quick note. A lot of people will ask us, what do I do next? And that's why we built Dr. K's Guide. It's a comprehensive resource that distills over 20 years of my experience, both as a monk and as a psychiatrist. And it's designed in a way that's tailored to fit your needs. So if you're interested in better understanding your mind and taking control of your life, check out the link below. But the third and sort of devastating thing is sometimes you couldn't blame brain fog and you couldn't blame a mental illness. And these were people whose brains had just kind of like rotted from like engaging in the wrong kinds of crap for like years or even decades. And this is kind of what I call brain rot. And what I sort of discovered is that these were people whose minds had essentially become incredibly rusty. So one thing to understand is that the mind doesn't wear out with use, it actually rusts with disuse. So oftentimes the people that I would be working with were people who like didn't have an infectious condition or something like that, didn't have like celiac disease. But these were people who were just kind of like degens. And they had stopped using their mind in a productive way over long periods of time. Or sometimes they weren't degens and they were just not controlling certain aspects of their life, where they were polluting their mind with sort of external negative things. And so as I started working with these people, I sort of realized, okay, like medical training isn't really gonna help. Even like frontier of medical training, like brain fog, which is like a new condition, isn't really gonna help. What these people really need is a way to unrust their mind and really tune it up and get it back to functioning. And so what I drew on is more of my yogic training. Because what I kind of realized is if you think about what a yogi is, what is a yogi? They're someone who actually overclocks their brain. They're someone who understands how to use their mind in a very functional way, and then they optimize their mental function. And once they do that, they can have all these like weird enlightenment experiences and like, you know, have visions of their past life and all this other weird psychedelic crap. So these are essentially people who overclock their brain, and what these people need, what the brain rot people needed, was essentially that as an antidote. So we're going to start off by using an analogy of what an actual infection is like, because I think that actually really explains what happens in our mind. So when we get a physical infection, the first thing that happens is we have a breakdown of a particular barrier, and then bacteria cross over. We're assuming a bacterial infection for a second. So bacteria kind of cross over, and then they invade us in some way, right? So there's some kind of invasion of the mind with brain rot. The second thing that we're going to talk about is once bacteria cross the barrier, then they start to colonize that particular space, right? So you can start with an infection that's just one small cut, but over time the cut will become inflamed, it'll swell, it'll spread, and if you don't treat it properly, the bacteria start gobbling up your healthy tissue and start replacing it with bacterial colonies. And this is also what happens in the mind of people who have brain rot, is certain thoughts will start to colonize your mind. So the experience of people with brain rot is that anytime they try to do something, their mind keeps on telling them to do something else. So if I'm trying to sit down and study, my mind is like starting to think about video games, and it's like, oh, why don't we do this, or why don't we do this, I don't want to study, let's think about this, let's think about this. So literally anytime you try to do something, you have to overcome the thoughts that are in your mind. So that's colonization. And the third thing, and this is actually what's kind of terrifyingly devastating, is adaptation. So in an infection, some of the worst things that happen are not the infection itself, but your body's adaptation to the infection. So in the most dire circumstances, when we're talking about young kids, like kids that are a year old, when they get an infection, their immune cells hyperactivate so much that they will get fevers that will climb to 104, 105, 106. And at that point, the human brain does not function properly. So young kids who get viral infections can actually have febrile seizures, which means that they have a seizure because the temperature in their body is so high. And why is the temperature in their body so high? It's actually an overreaction of the body themselves. So half the time, if we're talking about things like sepsis and stuff like that, when we're treating infections, we're not just treating the infection, we are trying to prevent a particular adaptive response from the body from causing more damage. And this is exactly what we see in brain rot as well. When you're sort of bombarded with negative thoughts and your mind is colonized, your mind will start to do things to try to fix this. And those can actually be more damaging. So let's run through these three things in sequence. Let's start with infection. So the first thing to understand is that in our current society, we have stopped filtering our perceptions. So people who have brain rot are people who don't filter what comes in. So let's start with a simple example of someone who wants to get a job. So they work really hard, right? They struggle against themselves, they overcome their anxiety, and they apply for a job, and they end up getting rejected. Now, if we really pay attention, if we sort of think about it objectively, like a rejection isn't that big of a deal. Like it's a normal part of the process. Generally speaking, people have to get rejected from a dozen or 2 dozen or even 3 dozen jobs before finding a job, and even more for the right ones. I personally got rejected from 120 medical schools before I got into med school. So rejection is actually a normal part of life. But for people who have brain rot, a single rejection gets translated into something else, right? So you get one rejection, and then your mind starts thinking, oh, like there's no point in trying. Like there's no way I'm going to get a job, right? It starts to populate or respond with some of these thoughts. And so we don't really pause and think a little bit about the actual factual information, which is I got rejected from a job, to our reaction to it. There's no gap between those two things. The moment someone gets a rejection, they automatically start to believe and think that there's no way that they will get a job. So we kind of see this all throughout our society. We also see it with things like trigger warnings, where what's starting to happen is instead of being able to handle information internally, what we're starting to see is people will become increasingly avoidant, right? So what's happening is if I'm socially anxious, I'm not going to go to a party. So what's sort of happening is I'm starting to control the circumstances which lead to particular sensory inputs, but I can't control my reaction to those inputs. This is the exact opposite of what a yogi does. So a yogi is someone who can recognize that if there is sensory input from the outside, that my reaction to it is actually something that I can control. And if I can control my reaction to negative things, then I don't need to let negative things control me. So a simple example of this from my clinical experience is like when I was working in the emergency room, let's say on an overnight shift, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, someone comes in high out of their mind on like cocaine or methamphetamines. And I walk in the room, and the first thing that they tell me is how I'm a fascist, how I'm an asshole, how I'm a terrible human being, I'm the worst doctor on the planet. These are all very objectively hurtful things to say. And do I get hurt by them? At the beginning, I did. But eventually, I learned how to filter my perception. Instead of letting those words directly into my mind and letting them shape my truth, what I learned how to do is create a barrier between those two kinds of things. So I'm not going to let the infection sink all the way in, right? So instead, what I start to do is I start to realize, okay, this is what this person is saying. Let me pause for a second and think about why would this person be saying this? Do they actually they think I'm the worst doctor on the planet? What do they know about my medical expertise? How long have they been working with me? I walked in and the deck was stacked against me, right? So as I start to create distance, as I start to recreate that barrier between the outside perceptions and my reactions to those things, those words hurt me less. And eventually what can happen is something really cool, which is that you can actually develop positivity and compassion towards someone who's treating you like crap, which is literally what you learn how to do in psychiatry residency, right? You pause and you start to think, oh wow, like, you know, I know we just met, and I'm sorry to hear that you think I'm a terrible doctor. Really curious what you base that on. But it sounds like you're really struggling right now, and you really think about me as the enemy. Like, I can totally understand where you're coming from, because I can imagine you don't want to be trapped in an emergency room right now, and you're restrained to the bed, and I can get that that's really terrible. What's your understanding of like what my job is? So we sort of think about what we get trained as medical professionals is not to react to what happens to us. And I see medical students that are good at this and bad at this, right? So the medical students that are bad at this kind of stuff, any kind of feedback will send them crumbling. Like it'll just make them fall apart. So even if you're in medical school to learn, for example, but if an attending tells them, hey, like, by the way, you did this thing wrong, it will be such a bruise to their ego. They're like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible medical student. They don't even realize that making mistakes is literally your job as a medical student. That's why you're a student, because you're not supposed to know everything. And you're in med school for 4 years because you're supposed to make a ton of mistakes. And it's my job or the attending's job to teach you how to correct those mistakes. It's not about being perfect when you step into the hospital for the first time. It's being competent enough when you leave for the last time. So this is a huge problem that people fall into, where if you are struggling with brain rot, I strongly recommend you think a lot about what is the actual factual truth of the situation and what your reaction to it is. And what you'll find is that people with brain rot, the reason they're so lethargic is because they do not filter their perceptions. So if I get one rejection, it becomes really, really, really hard to apply again. I can't focus on it, I feel unmotivated, I'm really lethargic, and that's because there's no gap between the actual objective world and your reaction to it. So what you need to do is increase that gap. And the way that you do that is by simple but difficult yogic practice, which is, okay, what was actually said, and what is my interpretation of it? And what you'll notice is that in the brain-rotted mind, there's no distance between those two things. And you will think that particular things are true. But the more that you pay attention, notice, okay, what is objectively correct? What is my interpretation or what is my conclusion? And stretch those two things apart. The second thing that we're going to talk about is colonization. So this is where, if we look at it in the mind, one of the key ways that yogis overclock their mind is by being very careful what colonizes their mind. So here's how the mind works. The sensory inputs we have will determine which thoughts arise in our mind. And like game developers understand this really, really, really well. Because what do they do the 3 days before a game releases? They advertise heavily, they have a bunch of sponsored streams where streamers are playing the game, everyone's talking about it, they have teasers, they have this trailer, they have that trailer, and why are they doing that? What are they doing? The more sensory input that they can bombard you with, the more thoughts will arise in your head about that particular thing. And this is how they get people to pre-order crap, right? Which pre-ordering is a terrible idea because we keep on pre-ordering half-made games that end up being like defunct at launch, but like it doesn't cost the company any financial, it doesn't do anything because you've already been given the money. And why do we pre-order? Because our mind is so overpopulated with thoughts of a particular game. So this is what you have to understand if you have brain rot, is that when you try to motivate yourself towards something, what you'll notice is that your mind is colonized by all kinds of other thoughts. So instead of just being able to do a task, the task is made 10 times harder because of all the random thoughts that crop up in your brain. So when I sit down to study, I can't focus my mind on this because my mind is thinking about this particular video game. It's thinking about playing Tears of the Kingdom or Diablo 4 or this particular thing or this movie is going on, and my mind can be populated by other things as well, right? So if I had a call last night with my parents who were like mildly toxic and they're like, oh look, why haven't you gotten married yet? What are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. If I let those thoughts into my mind, they will colonize it. And as I talk to my parents every single day and they bludgeon me, then I have to overcome those kinds of thoughts anytime I try to do something. So the yogis are very good at preventing colonization. This is literally why they live in caves in the Himalayas, because what they sort of discovered is that if I want to achieve optimal brain function, I cannot have a single distracting thought. And the best place to have zero distracting thoughts is literally in a cave in the Himalayas, because in there I have no sensory input. I'm in a cave, it's dark, there's no noise, there are no people around. I'm completely free from externally colonizing influences. Now, what does this mean for you? Now, the real problem, the reason we're seeing a rise in brain rot is because our society today is very invasively colonizing. We have notifications constantly, right? We have notifications from Steam, notifications from our apps. People are texting us all the time, right? Because communication is now a 24/7 thing. You're getting emails from your boss. All of this kind of crap is continually invading your mind. And I know this sounds very cliche, But this is where you've got to limit your technology use. And you're saying, but oh my God, this is overwhelming. I can't stop using technology. I'm not saying stop using technology. What I'm saying is notice that the more you get bombarded by this, the worse off your brain rot will be. And we sort of see this, right? Because when I work with people with brain rot and I ask them, how do you spend your days? They're like, I spend the whole day binge watching YouTube or on Twitch or playing video games or things like that. And this is where if you kind of think about it, why do you think about a particular game? You play 5 hours of it, you watch streams of 2 hours of it while you're eating your food, and you're listening to a podcast where popular streamers are talking about the game while you're cleaning up. And so what are you doing during all of those times? You are colonizing your mind with this stuff, okay? So the more that you can trim it down, and this is where it's like, it's a scale. So if you do even cut out a single one of those activities, like eat while not watching streams, or clean stuff while listening to music instead of listening to whatever, right? Any progress that you make will decrease the burden on the mind, will reduce the bacterial load in your mind, and will mean that you have to overcome smaller hurdles in order to do what you need to do. Not saying you need to go all the way to the Himalayas and cut out all things, but that's why people love doing that crap, by the way, because if you kind of think about retreats, right? Why are retreats so restful? It's because you intentionally cut yourself off from all that kind of stuff, and then your mind can actually like clean itself out. The third thing that we got to talk about is the adaptation. So remember that when we get an infection, our body will respond in particular ways, like we'll form scar tissue or other things like that. We have to somehow try to fix the damage. The problem is that in the process of fixing the damage, we can sometimes lose flexibility or set ourselves up for other problems. And what does this mean from the yogic perspective? This is where we get to the ahamkara or the ego. So when I don't filter my perceptions, and when someone tells me, when I'm in the 7th grade and someone tells me I'm a loser, that thought sinks in, right? The 7-year-old doesn't stop and think about, okay, hold on a second, this person is just mean. It doesn't mean that I'm a loser. So what happens with the 7-year-old is the perception doesn't get filtered or adjusted in any way. The perception becomes a true reaction, or your reaction to it becomes true. So the 7-year-olds start to believe that they are losers. So what ends up happening is when you don't filter your perceptions and your mind is over-colonized by sensory crap, you end up adapting by forming an ego. So you start to have beliefs about yourself as a consequence of number 1 and number 2. So when you apply for a job and you don't get it, and when you apply for, and you're like, man, I'm a loser, I shouldn't apply, there's no point. And then what do? You struggle, right? You work with a lot of willpower, your brain is very like rotted, right? So it's kind of like scuffed and it's really hard. You can't just pick yourself up, dust yourself off and apply again. It takes 2 months for you to apply for a second job. And then you get rejected again. And then you take 2 more months and apply for a third job. And then you get rejected again. What ends up happening is you form a conclusion about yourself. I'm lazy. I'm undisciplined. Jobs just aren't for me. The corporate world is not for me. Other people are successful. I suck at school. I have ADHD. You discover lots of I statements. The second you start having I statements, like I am ... you also, your mind starts doing something else, which is making comparisons. So then what happens is there's stuff that you want to do, but when you think about doing it, your mind tells you you can't do that because you're not like this other person, right? You look at other people and you say, that person is different from me. They can succeed at it, but I can't. These are all egotistical statements. And so how do the yogis overclock their brain? They overclock their brain by eliminating comparisons and eliminating their ego. Now this is really hard to understand, but I really want y'all to try because it's transformative. So who are you, right? So who you are is determined by your actions. So you can say that, okay, I'm afraid of heights, therefore I cannot climb, right? These are very common things, something that I struggle with and still struggle with. So if we sort of think about it, once you say, I'm afraid of heights, I cannot climb a mountain, you will not climb the mountain. This results in a lack of motivation, not fulfilling your dreams, missing out on opportunities, FOMO, whatever, all that crap. But the problem here is that you are letting your identity of yourself determine what you actually do. Whereas the real tragedy is what you do determines who you are, right? So if I'm afraid of heights and I end up climbing a mountain anyway, how do I feel about myself? I feel amazing. I feel like, wow, even though I'm afraid of heights, I am so awesome. I'm so proud of myself that I was able to conquer that. And once you're someone who starts conquering your deficits, you become a whole different person. Because then once you know you can conquer your deficits, then you have another thought in your mind, which is I'm lazy, or I'm not musically talented. But if you've conquered the fear of heights, now your mind can say, you know what? I can still learn how to play an instrument. Even though I was afraid of heights, I climbed to the top of that mountain. And even if I'm not musically inclined, I can still do it. So this is where we see another aspect, really, really important aspect of the adaptation that results in brain rot. The first is that once I determine things about myself, those I statements shape what I'm willing to do and not willing to do. And once I let those things shape my actions, I let it determine my future. And this is why people who have brain rot do not have control over their life. What they essentially do is live their life incredibly reactively. So if something from the outside comes and demands that I do something, like if I've got a test on Friday, then I can study. But the second the test is over, when Saturday rolls around, I cannot bring myself to read a book for the sake of learning. And then once I can't do that, I make conclusions about myself. I am lazy. And once I start to believe that I'm lazy, if I try to start doing something in life, that thought will crop up. Oh, you're lazy. You can't succeed at that. Don't bother. And so what we see is that actually our ego or our ahamkar creates this idea of sort of like, I can't do what I want to in life, and I have to start living very reactively. This is why people with brain rot cannot actually move towards a goal. Their life feels purposeless or directionless, and you're kind of living from day to day without any sense of like picking a goal and actually moving towards it. And as we tunnel down into why you can't move towards the goals, it's because your mind has certain conclusions about you. And the second that your mind makes that kind of conclusion or makes a comparison, it tanks your motivation, and then you're GG'd. So what do we do about this? What we end up doing is beware of those two statements. So anytime your mind says, anytime you feel like doing something, right, you have some kind of tiny impulse for motivation, what does your mind do? Smacks it down. It says, hey, you can't do that. You're a loser. And then you're like, oh, wow, okay, then you don't end up doing it, right? Because overcoming that internal lack of self-esteem is hard enough on its own. And then even if you can do that, you have so little energy for the task itself. So here's what you got to do. Notice that anytime your mind says, I am ... do your best to absolutely ignore it. And how do you do that? Because it's hard, right? Because it's really powerful. You recognize that the conclusions that I have about myself are also based on unfiltered perceptions. When I was 7 years old, and when someone told me I was a loser, I formed that belief and I carried it with me. But it's not necessarily true. So anytime you notice I statements, try to actually move in the opposite direction. Notice the statement and set it aside and say, you know what, we're going to try this. Even if it's destined to fail, even if we're lazy, we're going to give it a shot. The second thing that you really need to be careful about is comparative statements. So the ego is what makes you compare. That's the two go hand in hand. This is what the yogis kind of figured out. So anytime you notice yourself making a comparative statement, what is the effect of that comparison? The effect of that comparison is to discourage you from acting. Notice that, right? This person is better than me, therefore I should not act. Therefore I need to remain unmotivated. Therefore I'm going to sit at home and then I'm just going to browse YouTube. So these two adaptations that your mind uses to sort of respond to these events are actually what really devastates you. At the end of the day, when I work with people who come in and say, I'm lethargic, I have no direction, I have no motivation, I can't focus. Some of these people have what I call brain rot. And this is not a medical condition, it's not a neuroinflammation, it is simply a deconditioning or rusting of the mind. And in order to overcome this, what we really need to do is tune up our mind. And thankfully the yogis have figured out how to do that. And I would sort of say that the core feature of someone who has brain rot is that they live their life reactively, right? So my motivation is determined by external circumstances. If I've got a deadline, I can react to that deadline and I can sort of take care of it. But if I'm living my life reactively, and by the way, hey, I was doing this thing, I went to 3 classes where I was learning how to breakdance, and then my friend showed up for class 4, and it was his or her first class, and they did better than me, and it was so freaking embarrassing that they are natural, and I'm not a natural, so then I give it up. I never go to class 5. You are living your life reactively. What other people do determines your motivation, and this is why there is a complete loss of control. You're always reacting, responding. You can't pick a direction and move towards it. How do you fix this? You take the yogic approach of preventing infection by filtering your perceptions. Create a gap between what your actual sensory perception is and what your reaction to it is. Notice that a sensory perception is not the same as a reality. The second thing you need to do is control what colonizes your mind and literally restrict as much as you can the sensory inputs. So what kind of sensory inputs create motivation and what kind of sensory inputs create distractions from motivation? And you can start small. You can start as small as 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, 1 hour a day of simply being completely unplugged, go for a walk, right? Or go to some sort of like entrepreneurship. We have our Discord, for example, as an entrepreneurship community. Go to drop into like their hour-long voice calls and see what other people are up to. Start to colonize your mind with positive influences. And the third and hardest thing to deal with is the ahamkara or the ego. Because as a result of number 1 and number 2, we form identities. And those identities start determining what we do. They start controlling and shaping our actions. And this is really when we get truly stuck. Because the big irony is our actions determine who we are, not the other way around. But when we start letting our ego determine what we're capable of or not capable of, that's when we sort of really get stuck in this cycle. So use this yogic approach of filtering perception, decolonizing your mind, and paying attention to egotistical statements, and you will start to reverse brain rot. Everyone is stupid except me. Exactly like the title. I struggle getting pissed off by everyone because I feel like they're dumb and a bad influence on me. I just graduated high school and recently moved states for a job opportunity. I was good friends with a coworker. At first we got along well, but the more I got to know them, the less I desired wanting to continue my friendship with them. They make impulsive decisions, cheat on their marriage partner, and recently disclosed to me how they can't get their own apartment because they have a bad credit score from so much credit card debt. I want to help, but fear I will lose myself. It's a bad investment of time. Everyone else I meet seems to be a functioning alcoholic and waste their money. I try to have deep philosophical discussions with those I meet, but either no one is interested, or they do this thing where they pretend to be smart but are riddled with logical fallacies. I ask someone why they believe religion is a belief system but not the same for concepts like time or physical science, and they respond with, it just is. I struggle finding people I want to be friends with because of this, and have spent the last few months completely on my own, just working on myself, my finances, the gym, and studying. But I'm so lonely that I've been really depressed because of it. Life feels pointless because it feels like there's no one who shares the same mindset I do. I know I'm not crazy smart. I often feel like an idiot and still struggle a lot with being impulsive. That's why I can't have impulsive friends, because that environment of peer pressure led me to going through an alcoholic phase of my own that I got out of a few months ago. I was throwing money away on unfulfilling desires that I didn't care about for the sake of saying I have friends. My main goal is to get my DO and use my job's opportunity to expand it into real estate investments. I want to surround myself with people who help push me towards my greatest potential, but I rarely meet anyone like that. Both of my parents are divorced and live alone with little to no friends. I come from a racist country, and a major problem between us was me dating outside my race, to the point I questioned having to cut them out for the sake of their future grandkids. My mom is amazing and cared so much for me, but would constantly get upset and angry at me for spending time with dumb kids in high school, and to this day will tell me to stop hanging out with someone when I tell her about their problems. One of the few people I respect is my dad. He is incredibly smart and very successful, yet he suffers the same fate of having absolutely no friends and being impossible to live with due to anger issues, which is partially why I moved out. I love him and he is really one of the smartest people I know, but I only have bad memories of him getting upset at me growing up for not understanding things. I swore to myself I would never end up like him, but find myself following his footsteps. I mean no disrespect by the title, but I don't know how else to better phrase my issue. I want to stay friends with people and help them, but am I just compromising my own life? It's really hard for me to meet people who I feel are productive and good influences, but I also don't know if I'm being a cocky asshole who's out of touch with reality. Okay, what a good post. So let's start with this. So this is someone who says, everyone else is dumb except for me, right? So we see this all over the internet, right? We see this, like, people like to find quotes of these people who are very smart and put them out of context or maybe in context on places like the subreddit I'm very smart, and I want to have deeply philosophical discussions. Everyone around me is impulsive, no one's working towards their goals. I feel very lonely. And how do we respond to this person? Generally speaking, no compassion, right? So on these places like the internet and in life, we say have compassion for all people, except people who think they're smarter than everyone else. That's the one thing that you can say that allows other people to treat you like crap, right? If you've been traumatized by someone else, you deserve compassion. If your parents were narcissistic, you deserve compassion. But if you think you're better than me, screw you. Let's make fun of you. Let's laugh at you, right? That's the one thing. It's kind of interesting. So I really respect this person because this is a hard thing to say, right? That's like hard to say. Even they're self-reflective, they've done some good work, and I think it's amazing that already this person who is an I'm very smart person on the rest of the internet would be treated like crap, but already in our community, they've become a little bit more self-reflective. They've started to realize like a little bit about what's going on. And so being very smart or feeling like you're really smart is incredibly isolating, right? And we hear this a lot. It's hard for me to like meet people, like even, and we make fun of people who think they're smarter than everyone else because they're like, you know, like everyone else like can't debate philosophy, like quantum mechanics and philosophy and stoicism and whatever buzzword you want nowadays. Rick and Morty fans, perfect. So this experience, first of all, let's like start from the top, which is like what this person is essentially talking about is like isolation, an immense amount of isolation and loneliness. And we can also see that this person is making efforts, right? They're trying to meet people, they're trying to be nice. They're like worried though that if I hang out with someone who's like in credit card debt and cheats on their husband, on their partner, am I going to wind up like hanging out with the wrong people because, you know, that's not the direction I want to go? And like there's a valid point there, right? So what's going on here? Like how do you end up in this space? How do you end up in the place where you feel lonely and you also feel like you're smarter than everyone else and you tend to reject everyone around you for not being smart enough? You reject everyone around you because they're not moving you in the direction that you need to go. You want to surround yourself with people who challenge you and like want to push you to growth, right? So how did we get here and how do we get out of it? So let's kind of take a look at this, okay? So the first thing that I think everyone here noticed, so if you think you're smarter than everyone else, and you're lonely, how do you overcome this? And this is a good point, right? So like the first thing that they kind of say is that you should be careful with who you hang out with, right? So not everyone that you encounter is necessarily going to be worth your time. That's kind of like logical. Not everyone around you is going to be like interested in the same things that you are, so you may not want to invest in relationships. Like that's pretty logical too. But I think there's a lot going on for these people that I think that they don't realize. And essentially what happens is since they don't realize what's going on and they put on a particular air, they get judged very harshly and like receive essentially no compassion. So the first thing going on with this person is conditioning. And this is something that if you've been a part of this community for a while, like I don't need to point this out to you. So this person judges other people for not being good enough. What were they conditioned to do? Right? So if we kind of like talk about their mom, where's the section about their mom? So my mom is amazing and cared for me so much, so this person, you respect her, right? But would constantly get upset and angry at me for spending time with dumb kids. So what does this mean? Your mom taught you to be judgmental. And so you were ingrained, right? Anytime this person tried to make a friend, what did their mom say? They're not the right race. They're gonna hold you back. My gifted golden child. They're not the right people to hang out with. They're not the right influence. My golden child. They're not as good as you. This is conditioning. We can see it. Like this person even says, like, you know, I want to help, right? So he wants to help people. He wants to engage with people. I'm assuming it's a he for a second. I don't know why, but he or she wants to help people, right? So this person wants to help people, but like, what does their mind tell them? Like their mind is just incredibly judgmental. So the first thing is that, you know, if we kind of think about like kids who grow up racist, like why are they racist? It's because of what they've been conditioned to be. The second thing here is that this person longs for connection. The main thing that they're feeling is lonely. And when we start to feel lonely, that can manifest in all kinds of weird ways. And the loneliness can almost be a protective mechanism. So remember that the things that hurt us in life that are hard to kick are often doing something for us. Otherwise we wouldn't do them. So our brain is really good at figuring out like what's a good deal and what's a bad deal. And if you find yourself stuck in a situation where you're torturing yourself or you feel like you're lonely and you can't make friends, like there's something else going on underneath the surface. So the other thing to kind of point out is we say like, okay, the other reason that I kind of mentioned connection here is they talk about it as well. But, you know, what this person wants is, you know, I try to have deep philosophical discussions. That's what this person really wants. So what they want is the discussion. So they're not saying, I want to read a book. They're not interested in knowledge. Right? What they're interested in is discussion. And they're not able to find people who can engage in discussion. Like for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to be kind of missing out on this. So there are a couple of things that are like really important here. The next is when we have this sort of system of enforced loneliness and we are judgmental, when we are lonely due to judgmentalness, what's going on? A couple of things, okay? The first is that for people who have problems with self-esteem and wind up lonely, they sometimes will employ the defense mechanism of, I'm gonna reject you before you reject me. Okay? So I'm gonna ask you a question. What do you think this person would do if they found someone who was able to engage in a deep philosophical discussion? Let's say that there was someone who was like a PhD student in philosophy, really knew what they were talking about. What do you think would happen? Would the person engage with them? Right? It's interesting, right? So no one's saying this person would be thrilled and be like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So it could be a really interesting cognitive bias. The only people I see are like functional alcoholics. Like what? Not everyone out there is a functional alcoholic. Maybe you're hanging out in the wrong places. Like it could be possible. I'm not saying that you're not encountering functional alcoholics. Like maybe you're not hanging out at university campuses and stuff like that. But I'd be really careful about what you do with what you're looking for. Right? It's very terrifying. Because if you're an amateur philosopher who likes to smurf with people who are in credit card debt, and like you meet someone, you're like, because like there's a certain amount of attacking going on here, right? So it's like I ask why they believe religion is a belief system, but not the same for concepts like physical time or space. It's like you're just pulling someone into that conversation. It's kind of interesting, right? It's like, by the way, do you think religion is a belief system? And they're like, sure. They're like, what about science? No, like science is fact. Why? Right? Someone's like, sir, this is Wendy's. Exactly. So like, how do you get into these conversations? Like, you usually don't just like open up there, right? So what I'm actually getting is that this person has a deep desire to be challenged and to challenge people in return. Right? It's kind of like, it's interesting here. But I think that what this discussion aspect comes to is actually what this person is really looking for is to challenge other people and for that person to live up to the challenge and in turn to be challenged. Does that make sense? Like that's what, like I want to throw something out and I want you to push back and I want you to push back properly. But basically like, it's like this person is going around in real life and like throwing down the 1v1 bid. It's like they're just showing up places and they're like, hey, let's 1v1 bid. It's like people aren't quite ready for that, right? It's like, this is like real life 1v1 bidding. Right? Debate bro, yeah. But there's, even though we kind of make fun of this person, right? Like let's remember that we want to try to be compassionate and understand that what this person is really looking for is to challenge and to be challenged, which in turn, I think comes down to respect. Because what this person really wants is to be respected in a relationship and to respect someone else in a relationship. And this is where some of this stuff comes in, because if you're kind of feeling lonely, you gotta be careful because you could be employing this defense mechanism of, I'm gonna reject you before you reject me. What else is going on? When you're lonely and judgmental, option number 2 on the differential diagnosis is we hate in others that which we cannot fix in ourselves. Key. If you find yourself rejecting a particular class of people, there's a decent chance that the reason you reject them, in the vein of screw you specifically, is because of something within yourself, right? So let's kind of look at it. It seems like everyone I meet is a functioning alcoholic and wastes their money. Peer pressure led me to going through an alcoholic phase of my own, and I was throwing money away. Does that sound like anyone we know? Right? And this is also like, I also say it in kind of a meme sense, but let's be clear. This is almost a survival mechanism, because if this has happened to you, what is the lesson that your brain is going to learn? Steer clear of functional alcoholics who waste their money, right? Because you got pulled into this once before. It's actually very logical. But at the same time, you got to be very careful, because if you're rejecting a class of people, which is exactly what you yourself suffered from, then like you got to be kind of careful from that, right? Because a lot of that rejection is then, so people will talk about things like projection or displacement or reaction formation. So what do these things mean? So projection is when, if I'm cheating on my spouse, I will be paranoid and I will be thinking you're cheating on me, aren't you? You're cheating on me, aren't you? It's actually coming from me, but I project it out onto other people. The other thing that can happen is displacement, where I'm truly angry with myself for falling for this crap. But I'm taking the anger that I have towards myself and I'm displacing it onto other people. Like those functional alcoholics, those dumbasses, they're such terrible people. And then reaction formation is somewhat similar. So the best example that I have of reaction formation is the homophobic homosexual. So some people grow up in a particular environment where they are taught to hate something, or that they're taught about homosexuality and how homosexuality is bad, and they themselves are homosexual. And so the only way they can manage those feelings is to lash out against other homosexuals, right? So we hate in others that which we cannot fix in ourselves. So that could be going on here too. Okay. So the next thing is, if you're having trouble engaging in relationships, if you're lonely. So what we hear in this post is what this person wants, right? Like this is where I want to meet people, but no one is interested, or they want to do things where they pretend to be smart, but are riddled with logical fallacies. I don't think they pretend to be smart. I think they, you just engage them in conversation. Maybe they pretend to be smart. Who knows? Maybe they're insecure too. But if you want to have a relationship with someone and your problem is loneliness, a relationship is 2 ways. Right? A relationship goes both ways. So the question is, what do they want? This is where if you want to have a relationship, you may say okay, I don't want those things. But no relationship is going to be exactly what you want. Right? That's not even a relationship. Maybe you're looking for someone, and maybe you're looking for someone who wants the same things you want, which is possible. But I think there needs to be some kind of acknowledgement if you're lonely about what's the other person's perspective. What do they want from a relationship? And is it impossible for you to engage with someone who doesn't want what you want? Or can you engage with them anyway and maybe give them something that they want? Because maybe if they do that, they'll give you what you want, right? There's an exchange in relationships, which I'm not really getting much of. And the interesting thing is that I think that this person does do this. So it's kind of interesting because if you really talk about this example, good friends with a coworker, at first we got along well, they make impulsive decisions, I want to help them. So we see those elements there, meeting people where they're at, supporting them in their own challenges, all these kinds of things. But then I think this conditioning and all this other crap gets in the way. So the right stuff is there, right? But there's this weird kind of conditioning where he's been taught to be judgmental or she's been taught to be judgmental. And then they're maybe afraid of being rejected, and they maybe see negative parts of themselves in that other person, which causes them to push people away, right? And then we kind of get to the last thing, which is we try to fix our internal problems by surrounding ourselves with the opposite. So this is kind of related to this point here. But if I am impulsive and not disciplined and vulnerable to alcoholism, then I think I can fix that by surrounding myself with PhD students, right, who are into philosophy. And there's some truth to this. So you want to be careful. For example, if you're trying to get sober, right, they're very powerful social capital and community effects. You don't want to hang out with a bunch of people who are actively using it if you're trying to get sober. There's a lot of good reasonableness here. But at the same time, be a little bit careful, because a lot of these problems you're going to take with you, right? Surrounding yourself with people who are the opposite of what you are can absolutely have a good influence on you, but it's not going to fix the problem. Ultimately, if you're impulsive and prone to alcohol, those are things that need to be internally fixed, but internally fixed in a supportive environment. And that's where the environment kind of comes in, right? That's why you have sober houses. Because it's easier to do the internal work when you're externally supported. So I'd absolutely recommend that this person finds a different company. That's totally fine. If you want to go hang out with PhD students at your local university, go for it. But be careful about this business over here, because what you may find is that your mind may be looking for a way to dismiss them. That's what you have to be super careful about, because you may be finding some of the stuff that you actually want, but your mind may be dismissing it because deep down it's afraid of being the stupidest kid in the room, right? And this is where I would start to ask questions when your mom, was there anyone that your mom did want you to be friends with, and how did you feel hanging around them? What was it like being around people who were smarter than you, better than you, faster than you, better looking than you? Because there's a lot of stuff here that I think is conditioning. There's a lot of stuff here that I think you could be displacing onto other people. But the truth of the matter is that people who are feel like they're smarter than everyone else are incredibly lonely. And I know that the internet loves to hate on people who think they're smarter than everyone else, but the truth is they're just as deserving of our compassion as anyone else, right? We're just being judgmental. And there's just one thing that we find particularly annoying, right? It's the I'm very smart people and the Karens. And so it's just really hard to have compassion for some of these people. And at the same time, I think that this person has done an awesome job, because we start here and everyone's screw this person. And then as we get down to the bottom, it's I mean no disrespect by the title. I don't know how to better phrase my issue. They're just being authentic, right? I want to stay with friends, but am I compromising my life? It's really hard for me to meet people who I feel are productive and good influences. But I don't know if I'm being a cocky asshole. This is an incredibly humble, authentic representation of this person's problem. This person is incredibly lonely. And so what do you do if you're in this situation where you genuinely feel like you cannot meet people who are giving you what you want, who cannot challenge you, you don't have mutual respect in a relationship, right? And this, by the way, we'll get to that in a second. So if you're in this place, I'd start with sort of looking at your conditioning. Where were you taught to think like this? Because chances are there's a lot of judgment in your past. Either in this case, you were like your mom literally told you don't hang out with that person's stupid and is gonna hold you back. Or you were on the receiving end of the judgment, right? Or your mom called you stupid. And so you like learned to call other people stupid. We see this from this person's dad too, where the dad doesn't know how to form relationships. This person literally was not taught how to form relationships. Like that's a skill that most of us just learn because our parents like have relationships. And so when we're 3 years old and we don't understand what's going on, but my dad has an argument with his best friend and they start yelling at each other and they just ignore me because they're caught up in it, but I'm still watching it, right? It's still getting like laid down in my brain in some way, shape, or form. So this person just was conditioned to think this way. Secondly, they're incredibly lonely, right? They're not looking for knowledge, they're looking for discussion. They want to be challenged. They want to challenge other people. What they're looking for is respect. But respect is mutual. And you can't have mutual respect unless you respect the other person. And what I'm hearing is that when there's judgment, there's not a whole lot of respect. So you're never going to have mutual respect. You're never going to have a relationship. You have to start by respecting the other person. Right? Like if you want a friend, if you're lonely, you need mutual respect to have friendships. But as long as you're not respecting the other person, then like how's that ever going to happen? Another thing to be careful about is that sometimes we hate in others that which we cannot fix in ourselves. And we understandably want to avoid those kinds of people because they're bad influences. And so we try to surround ourselves with the right people, the opposite. But we can try to surround ourselves with whoever we want to. Those people can absolutely be good influences. But the problems I'm going to carry with me, like, you know, they're going to come with you to some degree. So you've got to work on that. And the last thing to kind of think a little bit about is like, what does the other person want in the relationship? Why don't you ask them? Why does the relationship all have to all be about your needs? So as you start to go through some of these things, as you start to realize your conditioning, as you start to recognize what some of your internal fears may be, maybe you're rejecting them before they get a chance to reject you, right? That could be going on. What actually happens when you meet someone who challenges you? How do you actually respond to that person? Because you may say, well, a couple things, maybe you just steer clear of them subconsciously. Or maybe you do all kinds of mental gymnastics to be judgmental towards them, to knock them down a peg when they're better at philosophical discussions than you are, right? It's very possible. And at the end of the day, I don't think that you have to be lonely if you're in this situation. You really don't. It's going to take some work. It's going to be hard work. Because this training does not happen overnight, right? Like, you don't get to this situation just randomly. You get to the situation when you've got two parents who've been really rough in terms of teaching you how to like form relationships. When you like make friends, like when you're 7, and your mom is like, that person isn't smart enough for you. Like, that sinks in deep. You've been programmed. So it's hard to undo that. And how do you start? It starts with mutual respect. It starts by thinking a little bit about other people's needs, exploring yourself. And then hopefully you can find what you're looking for. And by all means, like, explore outside of your current domain, because maybe you just need to go to different places, right? So there's some very practical stuff too. Right? Questions? Yeah, Rick gifted kids with parents like that. Absolutely. And someone's asking, how do you deal with conditioning in general beyond recognizing it? So recognizing it is actually like the lion's share of it. So if you trust the yogis from like ancient India, they will say recognizing it is sufficient. So the problem with conditioning is that it's like an invisible monster, right? You need detection. You need like a sentry ward or whatever the wall equivalent is. Like, you need to be able to detect your enemy to do anything. So the brain is pretty good. The mind is pretty good at like making the right choice. The biggest problem is like a problem of misdiagnosis. So once you figure out what the problem is, and you like, you guys may have seen this on stream. We haven't done interviews a whole lot recently, but you'll kind of see the cathartic moment where someone realizes, and then the behavior follows suit. Right? There's even good evidence that shows that there's this thing called the insight trial, which is super fascinating, which looked at the correlation between insight and behavior. So if you want to see behavioral changes, insight has to come first, and then the behavioral changes seem to almost naturally follow. So you can definitely do things to support the behavioral changes. You can operationalize, you can find the right kind of community, you can do different kinds of exercises, but actually insight is the most important thing. Once you recognize that that is conditioning, then you can intervene with it in the moment. So if I go to, let's say, like a philosophy club, and I'm aware, if I'm on the lookout for these things, and someone shows up there, or even before I go, it's like the day for philosophy club is there, I'm about to get in my car, and then suddenly my mind is like, oh, why don't we just play games? Like, we can go next week. Wait, I thought you were lonely. I thought you wanted deep discussions. Like, why are you suddenly thinking about playing games? Like, where's that thought coming from? Right? And as you begin to realize, like, oh, like, and then you ask yourself the question, how do I feel about knowing? Like, pick up your car keys, walk out to your car, and then, like, notice that your heart rate is, like, through the roof. You're tachycardic, and you're sweating, and you're just, like, trying to get into a car. Like, what's wrong here? And then you realize, like, something's up. Right? So awareness of conditioning is critical. And then once you become aware of it, then you can sort of realize, like, oh, this is me being afraid that, like, I'm going to be the stupid one in the room. And so am I willing to let that fear take control of me? It's okay if you are. You can say, yes, like, that fear is too much right now. So be it. Or I'm going to set that fear aside, and I'm going to try to go. Right? And then you start to condition yourself in other ways. So neurons that fire repeatedly get well grooved, right? So if we want to understand how conditioning works, it's kind of like a game trail in the wilderness. So it starts off with a field of grass that is all the same. And then a mouse runs through the field and tramples a little bit of grass. And then what happens is a rabbit approaches the field and sees, oh, there's one area where the grass is a little bit trampled. So the rabbit runs across the field. Rabbit's bigger than the mouse, so it tramples a little bit more grass. And then there's something like a small deer that walks across it because it sees an area that's trampled. And then like a bigger deer crosses it, and then another rabbit, and then another mouse, and suddenly you've got a game trail. That's the way your neurons work. So when you're told by your mom over and over and over again that these people are not good enough for you, you will start to internalize that. That is a well-grooved set of neurons. Neurons that fire together, wire together, right? So when you start to think in a particular way, all those neurons will get connected, and then all you have to do is trigger one neuron, and it'll trigger everything down the path. So how do you start to do that? It's the same way you make a new game trail. So in a given moment in your life, there's going to be an easy path which you've walked 1,000 times before. Or there's a hard path. You have to walk through the grass, and that's going to require more energy. It's going to be more difficult. You recognize that, right? That's like facing that fear in the moment that you're... Requires way more effort than going down the game trail. The interesting thing though is the second time you go to the philosophy club meeting, it's going to be easier. Because now there's a little bit of trampled grass. And then you do that the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time, and then suddenly by the end of it, and I've seen this a ton with people who are alcoholics, for example, 2 years, 3 years into sobriety, they don't even want to drink. So their neurons have been literally rewired. They've been reconditioned. But it all starts with awareness, right? It all starts with awareness. So when you go to a group, you're supposed to surrender. You're supposed to do whatever they say. They don't care about who you are, they don't care about how much money you make, they don't care about how you feel, they don't care about what you want. When they say jump, you were supposed to jump. But there's something, a huge problem with this, is that this is exactly why people open themselves up to abuse. This is why the gurus get in trouble. You have to be incredibly spiritually powerful in order to not give into the temptations of taking advantage of those people. So we used to have these people called gurus, who were known for having this mystical understanding of the universe and transforming your life through secret techniques. But there was a problem. These OG gurus started putting their peepees where they didn't belong, and their dedicated followers started doing things like poisoning people. So society as a whole kicked out these gurus, and in their place popped up something else, the self-help guru. And these gurus are gurus of a different breed. They're oftentimes influencers, content creators, people like myself, who are offering the masses salvation, advice, tips, biohacks, life hacks, brain hacks, all of these things to improve your life and make your life way easier. But there's a problem with my brand of guru as well, which is that a lot of their stuff doesn't seem to work, right? So if you look at the self-help industry today, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. You have lots of content creators, you have influencers, you have all of these people that are offering you all of this stuff, and yet the world is moving in the wrong direction. Depression is increasing, anxiety is increasing, suicidality is increasing, dating is an absolute mess, despite the fact that there are all of these pickup artists and relationship gurus out there who are offering you all these easy tricks to make women fall in love with you and make men respect you and buy you things, right? Despite all these things, the problems are getting worse. And we also have financial gurus, but it's harder to buy a home than it's ever been. So something weird is going on where we have all of this advice, but things seem to be moving in the wrong direction. And that's because we've lost something incredibly important that the OG gurus were really good at. There was something that they did that allowed them to transform their shishyas or disciples, which us self-help gurus don't have the capacity to do. In order to understand the difference, we have to unpack how self-help gurus work, and then we will discover a pathway to transforming ourselves, okay? And this is something that I have some interesting insight into because, here right now I am sort of filling the role of a self-help guru, but in my day job, I actually have a job of helping human beings as a psychiatrist. And there are a couple of big differences between those two things. And once we understand how change actually happens, we will be equipped to make change in our own lives that will be transformative, okay? So let's start with clinical psychiatry. So here is you, and here's the change that you want to make. So there's one thing that we sort of discovered in clinical psychiatry, which is that most human beings are ambivalent. Now, what does that mean? That means that most human beings don't just want to go in one direction. They want to go in two directions, right? I want to eat healthy, but I also want to eat unhealthy. Now, the problem with this is that when we look at most self-help gurus, what do most self-help gurus offer? They say, hey, I will teach you how to eat healthy. I'm going to make it easy for you, right? Sign up for my course of $699, and I will teach you all the recipes and all the things, and I will give you all of the benefits. I will teach you everything. It'll be very easy. So what they tend to do is emphasize benefit and don't really talk about the cost, right? So you can look at, like, let's say a fitness influencer, and all these fitness influencers will have, like, that pages for Instagram, so they'll have a little, like, looking super swole, and they'll say, like, oh, I developed some secret technique that will teach you some secrets about humanity that the EMF and the big pharma and the food industry don't want you to know, and if you do this, you will be able to look like me. Whereas if you really look at, like, if you want to get in shape and you want to look like those fitness influencers, really what you need to do is go to the gym 4,000 times. You need to work out for, like, 5 years in a row, 10 years in a row, and then you will look like that. But the problem is that doesn't sell, right? The only real hack, there is a fitness hack, to be honest, but there's a really good fitness hack. The problem is that it's like anabolic steroids and injecting your butt with, like, growth hormone and shit like that. Like, that's really the only fitness hack we have on the planet. Everything else is hard work. The problem is that when we look at fitness influencers or other kinds of influencers, other kinds of self-help gurus, what they sort of do is emphasize the benefit. And when I say when we fall into this category too, maybe we'll get into why that is. So they're always talking about the benefit. So the problem here is that anytime they tell you to do something, there's an expectation of a gain and a lack of emphasis on the cost. Now, this fundamental proposition that they make is actually probably the biggest problem with why self-help doesn't work. If we want to understand why implementing self-help is so hard, this I think is the best resource for it. So this is a book on motivational interviewing, which is an evidence-based technique that gets people to sustainably change their behavior. It's one of the most important tools in my tool belt when I'm working with someone with an addiction. So if you think about an addiction, this person wants to quit the substance or behavior, but then they're also drawn to the substance or behavior. So if we look at fundamentally, like, anytime human beings want to change, they don't just want to change, they want to change and they want to stay the same at the same time. So the problem with self-help is that they basically offer us, they have this idea of a gain over here where you are happy, but they don't really think about the cost. And then when you start to implement some kind of change, when you start to implement whatever the self-help guru tells you to do, you run into a problem. So all of them involve being simultaneously pushed or pulled in at least two opposite directions. The more you move toward one choice, the clearer its disadvantages become, and the more its opposite appeals, right? So let's think about what that means.
Let's do this.
So when you are given advice by self-help guru, you are over here. And when you look at, you envision your happy self, right? Here's the value. You're going to be a swole, right? You're going to be swole like everyone calls you. Okay, if you were saying you're going to be swole. But you're not really aware of the cost. Now, as you start moving in this direction, the cost actually increases, right? Every time you work out, you're looking at being super swole. But when you actually go to the gym, you feel good, you feel nauseous, you feel embarrassed, you feel like you have all of this, you have so far to go, you're never going to get there, you always give up. All of this negativity arises. And then here's the other problem. When you actually go to the gym, right? So you're happy, the happy you that you're moving towards, and now the cost is increasing, playing video games becomes more appealing. Oh, I'll just work out at home. Right? The closer you move towards your goal, there's almost this rubber banding effect, where the closer you move towards your goal, the more you actually want to move in the opposite direction. And this is the crux of the problem, is that the self-help gurus will focus on the benefits, but not focus on the cost. And why do we do that? Because we're living in an attention economy, where if we sort of tell you, hey, this kind of thing probably won't work for you, and it's going to take you basically, if you want to get into shape, work out for 4,000 days in a row. Like, if anyone says that, that's probably the safest, easiest way to get healthy, but no one is going to click on that. Everyone already knows that, right? So there's the tricky thing is that the most important solutions are kind of known to everyone. Now let's think a little bit about how the OG guru is different, and then we'll get to some neuroscience, which is really fascinating. Here's how the OG guru works. They'll tell you go to an ashram, right? You go to a monastery. This is what I spent 7 years doing. So the guru comes up to you and says, here's a bag of rice, and you're like, okay. And then they take the bag of rice and they toss it out onto the floor. So the rice goes spilling everywhere. They give you a pair of chopsticks. They're like, pick it up. And I'm like, what? So I start picking up the chopsticks kind of one grain at a time, right? And then I fill up the thing and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm training in something. This is like, I guess there's some secret technique here. And I go get the guru the bag of rice. He's like, good job. Takes the rice, dumps it out. He's like, do it again. I'm like, what? And so I'm like, okay, fine. I'm going to do it again because this is what the guru tells me to do. So I do it a second time, do it a third time. This goes on not just 2-3 times, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then I'm here to learn meditation. I'm here to learn yoga. I'm here to transform myself. And this guy, all he ever does is takes the rice, dumps it out every single day, and tells me to pick it up with a pair of chopsticks. So this is how gurus work, because on the path, if you're working with a guru, the most important thing is this concept of surrender, okay? So when you go to a guru, you're supposed to surrender. You're supposed to do whatever they say. They don't care about who you are. They don't care about how much money you make. They don't care about how you feel. They don't care about what you want. They don't care about your goals. They don't care about any of that stuff. They tell you to do something. When they say jump, you are supposed to jump. But there's something, a huge problem with this, is that this is exactly why people open themselves up to abuse. This is why the gurus get in trouble. Because when you have a bunch of disciples who are doing exactly what you say, you have to be incredibly spiritually powerful in order to not give into the temptations of taking advantage of those people. The other problem with the OG gurus is that many of them are what I would call false gurus. They haven't gone through the level of spiritual training, but since the tradition demands surrender, they're like, sweet, I'm going to be a mega guru. I'm going to have everyone surrender to me, turn over their bank accounts, and it's going to be Gucci. I'm going to get to do whatever I want to. And then they do all kinds of psychological gymnastics to justify the abuse that they heap on their disciples. But let's forget about all that and go back to how this actually works. If we want to understand why this is so effective, okay, we have to understand how behavior happens, how we take action. You have an action that you're thinking about taking, and your brain has all of these circuits that are influencing whether that action happens or not. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are the frontal lobes. These things are responsible for planning and executing long-term goals, right? So these people like doctors who are like, when I'm 16 years old, I decide I'm going to be a doctor. And then I have a goal that for the next couple of years, I'm studying really hard on my college entrance exams. I'm working really hard in college. I'm pre-med, I get a 4.0, I take the MCAT, then I apply to med school, then I go through med school, then I go to residency, then I'm a surgeon in one of the top programs. I spend 5 years doing that. So there's some people who are capable of, at the age of 16, deciding that they want to be a surgeon and spend 2, 6, 10, 15 years moving towards that goal. And then they end up as a freshly minted surgeon and they succeed in their goal. They've been focusing on that for 15 years. So the frontal lobes are also where a lot of our shoulds come from. So we know that we should be working out, eating healthy, maybe working on this coding certification, maybe polishing up our resume, maybe networking a little bit more, right? So this influences our action. The problem is that we have other things that influence our action as well. So let's take a look at our emotional circuitry, right? So if I feel anxious, instead of talking to people and tolerating it, I pull out my cell phone. If I'm feeling ashamed of myself, I won't go to school. I literally had that problem. I skipped, 3 days of Spanish class because I was playing too many video games. And then like on day 4, you feel stupid just walking in, right? Like you just missed 3 days. People are gonna ask you where you were. You don't want to lie. Do I pretend to have a cough? Like these are the kinds of thoughts that I used to have. And then 4 days go by, and then day 5 becomes harder. And now that you missed 1 week, catching up after on day 6, next Monday becomes even harder. So every day that goes by, the shame increases and it becomes harder and harder and harder to fix it. So we have emotional circuitry that influences our actions. And then we have, this is a super simple diagram, we have our dopaminergic circuitry, like our nucleus accumbens, which also influences our actions. So the nucleus accumbens is what gives us a sense of pleasure and motivation, right? So this is where like, when I play a video game, I want to play it again. So these are the 3 things within you that basically fight over determining what kind of action you take. Now, how do we decide who wins? So this is where I want you all to understand a very simple principle of neuroscience. Whatever you practice gets better. So if I practice writing, for example, writing cursive over time, I will get better. If I practice headshotting people in an FPS, I will get better at that. Whatever your brain, the more reps your brain does, the stronger that neuronal wiring becomes. That's how things become easier for you. So let's take a look at what we're practicing in our day-to-day lives. So right now, let's start with this idea that all 3 of these circuits have an equal influence, okay? So they sort of have an equal amount of stuff going into and influencing our behavior. When I do something fun, right? So when I play a video game, what does that actually do? It strengthens the connection between the nucleus accumbens and my final behavioral decision making, right? So I'm sort of expanding it. You can think about it like a pipe. And now I've strengthened this. And so now the dopaminergic circuitry is controlling more of my behavior. I've activated my dopaminergic circuitry. I played a video game once, then I want to play it again, then I want to play it again. So what I'm actually doing is I'm increasing the size of the nucleus accumbens effect on my overall behavior. This is also why people fall into problems like polysubstance use, right? So we think about addiction as a genetic predisposition. Oh, alcoholism runs in my family, so I'm prone to alcohol addiction. But if you look at a lot of people, the majority of the people in the world today, they're not just vulnerable to alcohol, they're polysubstance addicts. We're not just vulnerable to marijuana, we're vulnerable to marijuana and video games and pornography and alcohol, right? So we're vulnerable to all of this stuff. Why is that? How can we be vulnerable to all of these things? Do we have a genetic predisposition to all of them? Absolutely not. Each time we engage in these things, we are essentially practicing letting our dopamine control our behavior. This is also what we see in addiction, right? The more that you use, the harder it gets to quit. The more it influences your action. But it's not just dopamine. We also look at our emotions. So if I'm socially anxious and I let that behavior control me, and then I'm at a party and I go to the corner and I pull out my phone, what am I essentially doing? I'm increasing the effect of emotions on my behavior. So now that I gave into my emotions, right, I'm letting that activation dictate my behavior. And as a result, what happens? The impact of my emotions on my behavior actually increases. So it's kind of like I'm strengthening the connections between my emotional circuitry and what ultimately my action circuitry, let's call it that way, right? So now the more that I give into these things, the stronger of an effect they have on which action I end up taking. So this is where the self-help problem becomes actually super apparent. So when people offer you self-help, what are they doing? They're actually appealing to your dopaminergic circuitry. They're appealing to reward. They're saying, hey, if you do this thing, you will get some huge benefit. Or if you're looking at someone like a pickup artist or someone who's going to teach you how to socialize, they're saying, hey, if you take my course, we will teach you how to socialize and be really good at things. The problem is that what they're actually doing is they're appealing to your emotional circuitry and your dopaminergic circuitry. They're talking to you all about the benefit. And since our circuitry is already primed this way, we sort of come into these things with this expectation that we will get some kind of benefit. Now, here's the problem. Okay, so let's say they say, hey, if you do this thing, you will be successful. Sign up for my stock analysis course and you will make lots of money. So then you sign up for the course, okay? You sign up for the course, and then there's a problem, because as you engage in these actions, you don't instantly become successful, right? You don't become successful overnight. So you don't actually get a huge amount of dopamine, a tiny little bit of dopamine. And since you have this gigantic pipe which has very little flowing through it, then you don't engage in the action, because this is not it's not actually triggering action, because the dopaminergic signal is so small. They promised you all this stuff and they don't deliver very well, which is why there's a multi-billion-dollar self-help industry, because if they delivered, then you wouldn't need them anymore, right? So this is what I've seen as a psychiatrist. I work with most of my patients for 12 to 18 months at a time. That's kind of the average, right? Some people are a little bit less, but it takes about 12 to 18 months. And why is it 12 to 18 months? Because we're done at that point, right? They've figured out what their conflict is with their mom. They've learned how to set boundaries. They figured out what the problems are with the way that they date people. They figured out how to be more assertive. They've conquered their anxiety. So we're kind of done, and they move on. But what happens in the self-help industry is that you have a circuitry that's already primed for benefit. They deliver very little benefit benefit, and then your motivation is not there because these are the two circuits that are actually controlling your actions. Now, let's look at what the guru does. Picks up the bag of rice, throws it on the ground, says, pick it up. How do you respond to this? So the first thing that happens is you get angry. So you get a lot of negative emotion coming in saying, no, I don't want to pick it up, right? Then there's also an aspect of ego here, which is going to influence your behavior. And then, so then you have a choice, right? So when the guru says you have to surrender, you do whatever the fuck I say, I don't want to hear anything, you do what I say. So you do it once, okay? And then so what happens, that anger within you is telling you, don't listen, don't do it. But you control that anger, you use your frontal lobes, and you end up acting anyway. So when you feel angry, and you restrain that anger, and there's no benefit, there's no point to doing this, right? There's no benefit for you. How is this going to change your brain? So this is going to strengthen your frontal lobes, and you will actually shrink your emotional circuitry. So each time you do this, what's happening? You started out this way, right? Because you came in from all the self-help crap, and then it's going over here, and then you do it for 3 months, and then it ends up this way. And then you kind of end up with a brain where your rage and what makes you angry has very little influence on your action. And similarly, since you are working really hard, right, you're controlling the other parts of your brain, then what happens is your frontal lobes are really, really potent, right? They're coming in, now they're huge. And since this activity doesn't help you at all, you are shrinking the dopaminergic circuitry's effect on your brain. So now, I know it sounds kind of insane, but what's really going on here is you are changing the drivers of action. Right? Because the guru says something and there's no benefit for you. There's no benefit that your brain sees, and you train yourself to do it anyway. It feels frustrating. That's literally why they do it that way, right? They want to induce the frustration. There can't be any benefit. The whole point is for there to be zero benefit and for it to be frustrating. And the more that they put you in that situation and force you to act, they're teaching you how to practice controlling yourself. And once you have a brain like this, then any kind of action in the external world becomes incredibly easy. Oh, there's no immediate reward for me working hard at work? No problem. I am in control. Oh, this thing feels socially uncomfortable? I feel anxious? No problem. My brain is used to all kinds of negative emotions and overcoming them and controlling them anyway. This is how a guru works. The problem is that in order for this to be successful, we have to surrender, right? We have to give up our ego. We have to let go of our emotions. We even have to let go of advantages. We have to kind of put ourselves last and trust the guru. Because when we surrender, we put themselves fully in that, and that's literally what allows us to engage in these behaviors that are completely useless. There's another great example of this, which is that, so I just think this didn't happen to me, but there was a great Zen master who had the habit of smacking his disciples with sticks when they meditate. And then they'd be like, and then what would happen is that the people would start to develop some kind of trauma related to it, like a trauma response, where now you're anticipating and now you're looking out for the master, you're wondering, is he hiding over here, is he hiding over there? He pops out behind the bushes, smacks you. You're asleep, he smacks you. So he's been doing this for 30 years. He's been catching disciples. His sneak attack bonus is super huge. His hide shadows and his move silently are through the roof, right? He's like, oh, he's ninja Zen masters. And so he's smacking you so much all the time. And then something happens, you start to prepare yourself, you tighten yourself up during meditation, you're waiting for it, you're ready for it, and then he doesn't do it. 5 days go by, hasn't smacked you. You're like, oh, whew, maybe he's done. Smacks you just when you let your guard down. And so then eventually, what happens is the disciples learn one thing. The first is that smack isn't that bad, right? He's not trying to hurt you, actually. He's just trying to fuck with you. And so eventually what you discover, you come to one really amazing understanding. Look, master's just going to do this occasionally. Some days it'll be more, some days it'll be less. It doesn't affect my meditation. It doesn't affect what I eat. It doesn't affect how I sleep. Like, it disturbs me a little bit, but like, whatever, right? So I can continue to live my life, and the master can do whatever the hell he wants to. There's some small inconvenience. It doesn't really bother me that much. If he smacks me, whatever. I'm going to just do my thing. He can smack me as much as he wants. Imagine how that changes your life. So you learn some degree of surrender. You learn, hey, sometimes shit happens. I am not going to let the things that life sends my way disturb me. I'm going to keep my eye on the prize. And I'm going to let him do whatever he wants to. I don't really care. When that person leaves the monastery and bad stuff happens to them, they don't crumble. They don't fall apart. They become increasingly resilient. This is the original transformation that we talked about at the beginning of the video. People are transformed by gurus. They become different people. It's like the stuff that bothers and knocks down all the other people in life. These people seem more resilient to it. And there's studies, piles and piles and piles of studies. And that's what gurus are really good at. Now, we still have a problem. Because now we're stuck. So here are the self-help gurus. They're offering you lots of benefit, but not training your brain. Therefore, the moment that you engage in this stuff, the costs start to rise if you want accepting it. The more the costs rise, the harder it is to stay with it. Why is it harder to stay with it? Because your brain is built in order to control. And the more that you move towards that goal, the more the rubber banding effect kicks in. And the more that you want to, I don't like working out, so I did it, but let me take a week off. So I'm going to keep it up. I've earned the break. The most classic statement when you are trying to put your life together is, I've earned the break. What is it? I've earned the break is the mask that your laziness puts on. Is the mask that your dopaminergic brain puts on. Right? So it says, oh, I did this thing, now I really want to do something again. So let me come up with an excuse. It is the dopaminergic vulnerability in your brain that is now putting on this mask that feels fun. I've earned the break. Earned it. Yeah, good job. I earned the break. I don't deserve the break. That's what you say. You don't deserve shit. You picked up the bag of rice 1,000 times. Let's do 1,001. But there's a problem. Because today, we don't know what is a good guru and what is a bad guru. So many gurus have taken advantage of so many people. So what do you do? How do you solve this problem? Is it that you go find some guru and no, you're going to take advantage of?
I'm in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country, Pacific Palisades, California. I'm going to show you how to eat animal-based for less than $10 a day here. Let's start with meat. 80-20 ground beef, $3.50 a pound. You can eat a pound and a half of that a day for $5.54. A dozen free-range eggs, $6.50 a dozen. You can eat 2 eggs a day for $1.10. Organic bananas, you can eat 4 a day for 89 cents.
We think about how this will help me tomorrow. I'm working out so I can get my pizza. I'm working hard so I can retire early. I'm learning about stocks so that I can buy one. We're always thinking about our benefit anytime we take an action. The key thing that really teaches you is how to start thinking about your benefit. So if we can duplicate that, we don't need to do it. So sacrifice for yourself. Today when you wake up, think about all of the things that you're doing. Think about why you're doing it, but don't do them for yourself. If you're going to be healthy, you're not even healthy for yourself. You're eating healthy for a future you. You are going to pay the price today so that someone later can wake up one day, feel your body, and feel good about
so
their life.
Jimmy wakes up in the morning and both parents work, so they don't have time to make him eggs, and he has frosted flakes and fruit juice. So he goes to school and he's all hopped up on sugar, and then he crashes. And then he does the school lunch program, and he has grilled cheese, Cheetos, and cherry Coke, hopped up again, then crashes. The people at the school tell the parents, man, this kid must be bipolar or ADHD, you gotta medicate him. So he's medicated. And then
I'm so glad
he
I
doesn't
wasted
really
6
do
years of my life
recess because he's looking on his phone the whole time. After school program, he's inside. And then he goes home, and since his parents are helicopter parents, they don't let him outside to play in the neighborhood because they're worried about pedophiles. So he goes inside, plops himself in front of the television until his parents come home, and they're too busy because they're back from work, and so they order takeout, more fried food. And then he sits in front of his iPad before he goes to sleep. And he doesn't get a good sleep because he's had screen time all day, no sunlight, and no exercise. And this cycle repeats itself for years until he's single, suicidal, over-medicated, fat, sick, lonely, and depressed. And then he turns on TV because he wants to see what a Kennedy has to say about making America healthy again. And what does he see? He sees disgusting-looking senators who are funded by industry cutting him off so he can't even hear what the guy has to say. There are millions of Jimmys out there in this country. They've been neglected. They've been went to a supermarket. I got a coconut water. I opened it in the store. I never done cocaine, but I will drink a drink before I pay for it. Hear that safety seal break. You're like, what's a rush? You know what I mean? You walk around drinking and crap. You can't hide it. You have to be like a sheriff. Like, yeah, I'm just kind of checking it out. Walk around. Like you work there, like, hey Kyle, can we get more sun chips on salad? You know, yeah. I recently made a video about the best vegan.
Easier. But there's a problem with my brand of food as well, which is that a lot of this stuff doesn't seem to work. Right? So if you look at the health industry today, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. You have lots of content creators, you have influencers, you have all of these people that are offering you all of this stuff, and yet you're always moving in the wrong direction. The fact is increasing, anxiety is increasing, suicidality is increasing, dating is absolute mess, despite the fact that all of these pickup artists, the relationship gurus out there who are offering you all these things to make women fall in love with you and make men respect you and buy you things. Right? Despite all these things, the problems are getting worse. And you also have financial gurus that tell you to buy a home, ministry, whatever. Something is weird is going on where we have all of this advice, but things seem to be moving in the wrong direction. And that's because we lost something incredibly important that the OG gurus were really good at. It was something that they did that allowed them to transform their shishas or disciples, which us self-help gurus don't have the capacity to do. In order to understand the difference, we have to unpack how self-help gurus work, and then we have to understand the capacity to transform themselves. Okay? And this is something that I have some interesting insight into because, here right now I'm sort of filling the role of a self-help guru, but in my day job, I actually have a job of helping human beings as a psychiatrist. And there are a couple of big differences between those two things. And once we understand how change actually happens, we will be equipped to make change in our own lives that will be transformative. Okay? So let's start with clinical psychiatry. So here's you. Here's the change that you make. There's one thing that we sort of discovered in clinical psychiatry, which is that most human beings are ambivalent. Now, what does that mean? That means that most human beings don't just want to go in one direction. They want to go in two directions, right? I want to eat healthy, but I also want to eat unhealthy. Now, the problem with this is that when we look at most self-help gurus, what do most self-help gurus offer? They say, hey, I will teach you how to eat healthy. I'm going to make it easy for you, right? Sign up for my course of $699, and I will teach you all the recipes and all the things, and I will give you all of the benefits. I will teach you everything. Will be very easy. So what they tend to do is emphasize benefit and don't really talk about the cost. Right? So you can look at, like, let's say, a fitness influencer. Now, all these fitness influencers will have, like, web pages or Instagrams or whatever, where they're like looking super swole, and they'll say, like, oh, I've developed some secret technique that will teach you some secrets about humanity that the PMF and the big pharma and the food industry don't want you to know. And if you do this, you will be able to look like me. Whereas if you really look at, like, if you want to get in shape and you want to look like a fitness influencer,
what I think are the
you go to the
top
gym 4,000
5
times. You need to work out for like 5 years in a row, 10 years in a row, and then you look. The problem is not that it's sucks. Right? And you'll hack and do it.
We're all about location based out. So wherever you find your friends, places, events, and now, so we're coming out with this new app. It's called Blue Star. It's based entirely on Facebook tracking. And it is all about helping you find your friends. We also will show you the specials near you, so you can see, all of these cool
lack of emphasis.
Decided to spend $100 eating healthy at Costco. First, we're going to cover some protein. This is almost 4 pounds of tri-tip, and it's going to be $38. Next, I'm going to get a bunch of chicken thighs. These are even organic. This is going to be $25, and you're getting 4.2 pounds of chicken. We're at $63. I need a little bit more protein. I'm not going to get these bullshit croissants right here. Not going to waste my money on that. Now we're going to get a pound of my favorite cheese, and it's going to pair really well with what we're about to get next. This is $12 for the pound, and while that is pricier than some of the other cheeses, I just love this stuff. Let me know if you've tried this below. Now we're going to get 24 cage-free eggs for $5. If you want to spend more, get the organic, which are going to be $9, but because this is a budget-friendly haul, we're going with these. Let's spend $16 on this disgusting soy creation, gross-ass, Billy Gates funded, oh no, $2 for 3 pounds of bananas. Yeah, we'll take that. 3 pounds of organic apples, $5. That brings us to $87. Let's go. You know we need some carbohydrates. 10 pounds. My name's Tyler, and I'm
kind of stevia daddy. Kind of like a sugar daddy, but a little bit lighter. Here we are. Nice that we're staying at the Ritz. No, I said the place we're staying would have the Ritz. Crackers that you like. Am I rich?
Playing video games becomes
Which
more
one
of a
do you
feeling. Oh, I'll just work out at home. Right? The closer you move towards your goal, there's almost this rubber banding effect. Where the closer you move towards your goal, the more you actually want to move in the opposite direction. This is the crux of the problem. Because the self-help guru will focus on the benefits, but not focus on the costs. And why do we
When I got out of prison, I got a gym membership, and I ended up taking a shower with the judge that sent me to prison. And so I walked into the fucking shower, and there's Judge Curl, hey, Judge Curl, just said the judge
the most important solution is kind of known to others. But let's take a look at how the OG guru is just
I like them sick and be
here's how
sick.
the OG guru works. Don't go to one.
Okay, guys, so this is my by your mid-20s, you should understand alcohol is a life to live. So you normalize poison. If you need alcohol,
so I start picking up the
go to a
chopstick kind of one grain at a
restaurant. So
time,
I got
and then I start
married
thinking,
when I
I'm like,
was
okay, this is
24 years old. Learned a lot about drinking.
So I go to
It's
the bag of rice. He's like, good job,
important,
take
of
the rice, dump it out.
course.
He's like, do it again. I'm like, what? And so I'm like, okay, fine, I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna do it again. So I do it a second time, do it a third time.
I mean,
It goes on
you
not
can
just
afford a
2
bit of
times,
discipline.
1 month, 2 months,
It's
3
a
months,
symbol
and then I'm here to learn meditation. I'm here to learn yoga. I'm here to transform myself. And this guy, all he ever does is take the rice, dumps it out every single day, and tells me to pick it up with the chopstick. So this is how it works. Because on the path of what you do, the most important thing is the concept of surrender. Okay? So when you go to a guru, you're supposed to surrender. You're supposed to do whatever they say. They don't care about who you are. They don't care about how much money you make. They don't care about how you feel. They don't care about what you want. They don't care about the goals. They don't care about any of that stuff. They tell you to do something, and they say don't. You're supposed to jump. So there's something that I do problem with this is that this is exactly why people open themselves up to abuse. This is why the gurus get in trouble. Because if you have a bunch of disciples who are doing exactly what you say, you have to be incredibly spiritually powerful in order to not give into the temptation of taking advantage of this. The other problem with the OG gurus is that many of them are what I would call false gurus. They haven't gone through the level of spiritual training, but since the tradition demands surrender, they're like, sweet, I'm going to be a heavy guru. I'm going to have everyone surrender to me. Turn over their bank accounts, and I'm going to take the I'm going to do whatever I want to. And then maybe all kinds of psychological gymnastics to justify the abuse that they heap on their disciples. But forget about all that and go back to how this actually works. If we want to understand why this is so effective, okay, we have to understand how behavior happens, how we take action. You have an action that you're taking about. And your brain has all of these circuits that are influencing whether that action happens or not. The first thing that we're going to talk about are the frontal lobes. These things are responsible for planning and executing long-term goals, right? So these people like doctors, they're like, when I'm 16 years old, I decide I'm going to be a doctor. And then I have a goal that for the next couple of years, I'm studying really hard on my college entrance exams, I'm working really hard in college, I'm pre-med, I get a 4.0, I take a MCAT, then I apply to med school, then I go through med school, then I go to residency, then I start doing one of the top programs, I spend 5 years doing that. So there's some people who are capable of, at the age of 16, deciding that they want to be surgeons, and spend 2, 6, 10, 15 years moving towards that goal, and then they end up as a freshman surgeon, and they succeed in their goal. They've been focusing on that for 15 years. So the frontal lobes are also where a lot of our shoulds come from. So we know that we should be working out, eating healthy, maybe working on this coding certification, maybe polishing up our resume, maybe networking a little bit more. Right? So this influences our actions. The problem is that we have other things that influence our actions as well. Let's take a look at our emotional circuitry. Right? So if I feel anxious, instead of talking to people and tolerating it, I pull out my cell phone. If I feel ashamed of myself, I won't go to school. I literally have that problem. I skipped 3 days of Spanish class because I was playing too many video games. And then like on day 4, you feel stupid just walking in, right? Like you just missed 3 days. People are gonna ask you where you were. You don't want to lie. You pretend to have a cough. Like these are the kinds of thoughts that I used to have. And then 4 days go by, and then day 5 becomes harder. And now that you missed 1 week, catching up after on day 6, next Monday becomes even harder. So every day that goes by, the shame increases, and it becomes harder and harder and harder to fix it. So we have emotional circuitry that influences our actions. And then we have, this is a super simple diagram, we have our dopaminergic circuitry, we have our nucleus accumbens, which also influences our actions. So the nucleus accumbens is what gives us a sense of pleasure and motivation, right? So this is where like when I play a video game, I want to play it again. So these are the 3 things within you that basically fight over determining what kind of action you take. Now how do you decide who wins? So this is a very simple principle of motion. Whenever you practice, gets better. So if I practice writing, for example, writing perfect cursive over time, I will get better. If I practice headshotting people in FPS, I will get better. Whenever your brain, the more reps your brain does, the stronger that neural wiring becomes. That's how things become easier. So let's take a look at what we're practicing in our day-to-day lives. So right now, let's start with the all 3 of these circuits have an equal influence.
social media video.
So they sort of have an equal amount of stuff.
Is that Greg coming in to bring coffee? Because you're going to be
When I do
serving
something fun,
coffee
so
a
when I
little
play
bit
a
later.
game, what does
Welcome
it
to
actually do?
Good Morning Norma. Say hi to everybody out there.
And my final behavior
What's the matter
so I'm sort of
is
expanding
owning a
into that
restaurant.
and now I've strengthened this. And so now the dopaminergic circuitry is controlling more of my behavior. I've activated my dopaminergic circuitry. I played the video game once, then I want to play it again, then I want to play it again. So what I'm actually doing is I'm increasing the size of the nucleus accumbens effect on my overall behavior. This is also why people fall into problems like falling substances. But we think about addiction as a genetic predisposition. Alcoholism runs in my family. So I'm prone to alcohol addiction. So if you look at a lot of people, the majority of the people in the world today, they're not just vulnerable to alcohol, they're polysubstance addicts. We're not just vulnerable to marijuana, we're vulnerable to marijuana and video games and pornography and alcohol, right? So we're vulnerable to all of this stuff. Why is it? How can we be vulnerable to all of these things? Do we have a genetic predisposition to all of them? Absolutely not. Each time we engage in these things, we are essentially practicing letting our dopamine control our behavior. There's also what we see in addiction, right? The more that we use, the harder it gets to quit. The more influences we act. But it's not just dopamine. We can also look at our emotions. So if I'm socially anxious, and I let that behavior control me, and then I'm out partying, I go to the corner, I pull out my phone, what am I essentially doing? I'm increasing the effects of emotions on my behavior. So now that I go into my emotions, right, I'm letting that activation dictate my behavior, and as a result, what happens? The impact of my emotions on my behavior actually increases. So kind of like I'm strengthening the connections. between my emotional circuitry and what
this
ultimately
more
my
than
action
free
circuitry looks like. Right? So now the more that I get into these things, the stronger of an effect they have on your action and methods. So this is where the self-help problem becomes actually super apparent.
Who are you wearing? I'm going to ask him to get it out of the
Offering
way.
self-help, what are they doing? They're actually appealing to your dopaminergic circuit. They're appealing to reward. They're saying, hey, if you do this thing, you'll get some huge benefit. Or if you're looking at someone like a
Just
pickup artist
flicking
who's
a tab
trying
up
to
is gonna
socialize,
solve
they're
this
saying, hey,
problem.
if
That's all
you
it
take
takes.
my course,
Prove it.
we will teach you how to
Let me turn the
socialize and
power
do really
up.
good at things.
Mr.
The problem is that
Presley,
what they're actually doing is they're
what
appealing
is
to
your
your emotional
opinion of
circuitry and your
war
dopaminergic circuit. They're
protesters?
talking to you all about
And
the
would you
benefit.
today
And since our
refuse to be
circuitry is already primed
drafted?
this way, we sort of come into these things with
I
this
mean, I
expectation that we will get
just
some
tend to
kind of
keep my
benefit.
own
Now, here's
personal
the problem.
views about that to
Okay, so let's
myself.
say, hey,
So
if you do this thing,
I'm just an
you will
entertainer,
be
and I
successful. Sign up for my stock
I don't
analysis
know.
course and
You
you will make
think
lots of money.
other
So then you sign up for
entertainers
the
should
course.
also keep
Okay?
their views to
You sign up for the course,
themselves?
and then there's a problem because as you engage in these
Satisfied with
actions,
the image you've
you don't
established?
instantly
Well, the
become
image is one
successful, right?
thing,
You don't become a successful
human
overnight.
being
You
is
don't actually
another,
get a huge
you
amount of
know.
dopamine. You just get a tiny little bit of dopamine. And since you have the
It's
type of
very
barrier
hard
going
to
through it,
live up
then you
to
don't
an
engage in
image.
the action
Put it
because
that way.
it's not actually triggering action because the dopaminergic signal is so small. They promise you all this stuff and they don't deliver very well, which is why there's a multi-billion-dollar self-help industry. Because if they delivered, then you wouldn't need
Such
them
a crook,
anymore.
yes,
Right?
they
This is what
talk
I've seen as a psychiatrist. I work with most of my patients
What
for 12 to
about
18
your
months.
image as a
Some people
shy,
a little bit less, but
humble
12 to 18
country
months. And why
boy?
is it 12 to 18 months? Because we're done at that point, right? They figured out what their conflict is with their mom. They
What
learned
makes
how to
them
set
think
boundaries.
that?
They figured
You
out
know,
what the
this
problems are with
gold
the way that they date people. They figured out how to be more assertive. They conquered their anxiety. So we're kind of done and we move on. But what happens in self-help industry is that you have a circuitry that's already primed for benefit. They deliver very little benefit, and then your motivation is not there because these are the two circuits that are actually controlling your actions. Now,
We
let's
got
look at
one
the rest.
order.
Let's look at the bag of rice.
There's
Throw it on the ground. Let's pick it
Yeah.
up.
So I
How do you respond to it? So the first thing that happens is you're angry.
the strap
You have a lot of
in.
negative emotions coming in saying, no, I don't want to pick it up, right? There's also an aspect of ego here. And then, so then you have a choice, right? So the Buddha gets started to do whatever the fuck I say, I want to do it, and you do it. So you do it once, okay? And then so what happens? That anger within you is telling you, don't listen, don't do it. But you control that anger, you use your frontal lobes, and you end up acting anyway. So when you feel angry, and you restrain that anger, and there's no benefit, there's no point to doing this, right? There's no benefit to you. How is this going to change your brain? So this is going to strengthen your frontal lobes, and you will actually shrink your emotional system. But each time you do this, what happens? You start out this way, right? Because you train into self-help class. And then it's going over here, and then you do it for 3 months, and then it comes up this way. And then you kind of stand up with a brain where your rage and what makes you angry has very little influence on your action. And similarly, since you are working really hard, right, you're controlling your other parts of your brain, then what happens is your frontal lobes are really,
You
really
know
potent.
everyone
Right?
says
They're
they
coming in
want
now
gummy
with you.
bear
And since this actually doesn't
implants?
help you at all, you are
Gummy
strengthening
bear
the
is
dopaminergic
actually just
circuitry's
silicone.
effect
All
on your
silicone
brain.
implants
So now, I know
are
it sounds kind of
gummy
insane, but
bear,
here's
and
what
this
I'm
is
on
why. If you
If
look
you
at
are
it, I did cut this
changing
open.
the drivers of action, right?
But
Because the guru says something, and
if
there's
you
no benefit.
open it,
There's no benefit that your brain sees.
it's
And
like
you train
if
yourself to
you
do it anyway.
cut
It
open
feels
a
frustrating.
gummy
That's
bear
literally why they do
and
it that way.
pull it
Right? They
apart,
want
or
to
if you
be super
like bit
frustrated. There
one,
can't be any
it's the
benefit.
same
The whole point is for there to be
consistency.
zero benefit,
It
and for
doesn't
it to be
fall
frustrating.
out. People are
And
always
the more that
scared
they
about
put you
them
in that
rupturing,
situation
but
and
no,
force
the
you
light
to
turned off,
act,
it's fine.
they're teaching you how to practice
Can you explain what the
controlling yourself.
10,000 year
And once you
clock
have a brain
is?
like this, then any kind of action in the external world becomes competitive easy. Oh, there's no immediate reward for you working hard at work? No problem. I am in control. Oh, this thing feels socially uncomfortable? I feel anxious? No problem. My brain is used to all kinds of negative emotions and overcoming them and controlling them anyway. This is how it works. The problem is that in order for this to be successful, we have to surrender, right? We have to give up our ego. We have to let go of our emotions. We have to let go of advantages. We have to kind of put ourselves last and trust the game. Because when we surrender, we put ourselves fully in that, and that's literally what allows us to engage in behaviors that are completely useless. There's another great example,
Frozen.
which is that, so I just think what's happened to me. But there was a great Zen master who had the habit of smacking his disciples with sticks when they meditate. And then they'd be like,
We've all had
and then
that
what would happen
pesky stove.
is the people would start to
Get
develop some
clean.
kind of trauma related.
Today's life hack is going to tell you exactly how to do that. We take toothpicks, we put them in all the little holes of the burners, and we take the burner off of the stove, we take it over to the sink, and you take some fresh garlic, you take a clove, and you literally just rub it over the entire area of what's dirty, and just get a nice little coat, then take a magic eraser with some water, nothing crazy, water, rub it on there, clean it off, lid, we're
Disciples learn one thing. First is that smack isn't that bad, right? He's not trying to hurt you, actually. He's just trying to fuck with you. And so eventually what you discover, you come to one really amazing understanding. Look, Master's just going to do this occasionally. Some days it'll be more, some days it'll be less. It doesn't affect my meditation. It doesn't affect what I eat. It doesn't affect how I sleep. It disturbs me a little bit, but like whatever, right? So I can continue to live my life, and Master can do whatever the hell he wants to do. Some small inconvenience. It doesn't really bother me that much. If he smacks me, he smacks me. Whatever. I'm going to just like do my thing. He can smack me as much as he wants. Imagine how that changes your life. So you learn some degree of surrender. You learn, hey, sometimes shit happens. I am not going to let the things that life sends my way disturb me. I'm going to keep my eye on the prize. And I'm going to let him do whatever he wants to. I don't really care. When that person leaves the monastery and bad stuff happens to them, they don't crumble. They don't fall apart. They become increasingly resilient. This is the original transformation that we talked about at the beginning of the video. People are transformed by use. They become different people. It's like the stuff that bothers and knocks down all the other people in life. These people seem more resilient to it. And there's studies, piles and piles and piles of studies that show that meditative practice, which is just the tip of the iceberg, is really good at enhancing resilience, increases resilience by somewhere between 17 and 22%, enhances quality of life, enhances happiness, strengthens our frontal lobes, helps with ADHD, helps with schizophrenia, helps with depression, helps with anxiety, because we are training our brain. And that's what we are good at. Now, we still have a problem, because now we're kind of stuck, right? So here are the self-help gurus. They're offering you lots of benefit, but not training your brain. Therefore, the moment that you engage in their stuff, the costs start to rise, which you weren't expecting at the very beginning. The more the costs rise, the harder it is to stay motivated. Why is it harder to stay motivated? Because your brain is dopaminergically controlled. And the more that you move towards that goal, the more the rubber banding effect kicks in. And the more that you want to, I don't like working out. Sure, I did it for a week, but like, let me take a week off, right? I want you to think about that. I've earned a break. The most toxic statement when you are trying to put your life together is, I've earned a break. What is that? I've earned a break is the mask that your laziness puts on. is the mask that your dopaminergic brain puts on, right? So it says, oh, I did this thing, now what I really want to do is play video games. So let me come up with an excuse. It is the dopaminergic vulnerability in your brain that is now putting on this mask that feels positive. I've earned a break. Earned it. Yeah, like good. I did a good job. What a break. Everyone deserves a break. That's where the guru steps in. The guru's like, you don't deserve shit. You picked up the great bag of rice 1,000 times. Let's do 1,001. But there's a problem because today we don't know what is a good guru and what is a bad guru. So many gurus have taken advantage of so many people. So what do you do? How do you solve this problem? Is it that you should go find some guru and devote yourself to? No, you're gonna get taken advantage of, just like most of the people in the world get taken advantage of, because the number of false gurus in the world far outweighs the number of real ones. So what do? You take the principle of the guru and you apply it to your own life. Sacrifice, surrender. So every day when you wake up, what is the guru truly teaching you? The guru is teaching you do this thing with no benefit. It doesn't matter how you emotionally feel. You do the thing for the sake of doing the thing. So what I want you all to do, and this is what sort of works when I teach it sort of in a clinical setting, is focus on the concept of sacrifice. Sacrifice for yourself. See, most of the time when we work with the self-help gurus, we are taking action for our benefit. If you sign up for this thing, you will be helped in this way, right? So we are ultimately acting for an advantage, for some kind of benefit for ourselves. So we are focusing on the benefit, and if the cost is too high, we're going to quit. Instead, what we're going to do is sacrifice. Sacrifice for yourself. Do this thing today. But this is the tricky thing. Normally, when we focus on discipline and working hard, we think about how this will help me tomorrow. I'm working out so I can get my beach watch. I'm working hard so I can retire early. I'm learning about stocks so that I can buy a yacht. We're always thinking about our benefit anytime we take an action. The key thing that a guru teaches you is how to stop thinking about your benefit. So if we can duplicate that, we don't need a guru. So maybe conversation for today. So sacrifice for yourself. Today, when you wake up, think about all of the things that you're going to be doing and think about why you're doing them. But don't do them for yourself. If you're going to eat healthy, you're not eating healthy for yourself. You're eating healthy for a future you. You are going to pay the price today so that someone later can wake up one day in your body and feel good about their life. You are giving a gift to the future version of yourself. And this is the most important thing to remember. You will never benefit from it. The moment that you adopt this attitude of sacrifice, I'm going to do this for future me. I'm going to do this for future me. You have to squeeze out any kind of benefit for yourself. Because if you are in your mind thinking about a benefit for yourself, then what will happen is you deserve a break, right? And the opposite of this is true all the time. We think about procrastination. We think about how far behind. What's the problem with procrastination? The problem with procrastination is present you is screwing over future you. Present you doesn't give a shit about future you. And when you are suffering in procrastination, do you look back and think to yourself, man, I'm so glad I wasted 6 years of my life playing video games. That was such a great use of my time. Man, this is amazing. All of the happiness from the past 6 years outweighs my suffering today. You're going to look back and you're saying, man, what a great life lived. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the future you is not really you. It's a completely different person. The sacrifice that you experience today is going to be a benefit for a completely different human being. This is the main thing that gurus teach you. So when you think about your life today, when you think about taking action, don't think about the benefit. Just think about the price. Just think today I'm doing this for someone else to benefit. For the benefit of a future version of myself. When will that future version come? If y'all have been paying attention, you'll figure out the answer. We all hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, we'll see you in chat. So society as a whole kicked out these gurus and in their place popped up something else, the self-help guru. And these gurus are gurus of a different breed. They're oftentimes influencers, content creators, people like myself, who are offering the masses salvation, advice, tips, biohacks, life hacks, brain hacks, all of these things to improve your life and make your life a little easier. But there's a problem with my brand of guru as well, which is that a lot of your stuff doesn't seem to work, right? So if you look at the self-help industry today, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. You have lots of content creators, you have influencers, you have all of these people that are offering you all of this stuff, and yet the world is moving in the wrong direction. Depression is increasing, anxiety is increasing, suicidality is increasing, dating is an absolute mess, despite the fact that there are all of these pickup artists and relationship gurus out there who are offering you all these easy tricks to make women fall in love with you and make men respect you and buy you things, right? Despite all these things, the problems are getting worse. And we all have gurus who are telling the bias than it's ever been. Something is weird is going on where we have all of this advice, but things seem to be moving in the wrong direction. And that's because we've lost something incredibly important that the OG gurus were really good at. There was something that they did that allowed them to transform their shishyas or disciples, which us self-help gurus don't have the capacity to do. In order to understand the difference, we have to unpack how self-help gurus work, and then we will listen to a big pathway to transforming ourselves. Okay, and this is something that I have some interesting insight into because, you know, here right now I am sort of filling the role of a self-help guru, but in my day job, I actually have a job of helping human beings as a psychiatrist. And there are a couple of big differences between those two things. And once we understand how change actually happens, we will be equipped to make change in our own lives that will be transformative. Okay, so let's start with clinical psychiatry. So here's you, and here's the change that you want to make. So there's one thing that we sort of discovered in clinical psychiatry, which is that most human beings are ambivalent. Now, what does that mean? That means that most human beings don't just want to go in one direction. They want to go in two directions, right? I want to eat healthy, but I also want to eat unhealthy. Now, the problem with this is that when we look at most self-help gurus, what do most self-help gurus offer? They say, hey, I will teach you how to eat healthy. I'm going to make it easy for you, right? Sign up for my course of $699, and I will teach you all the recipes and all the things, and I will give you all of the benefits. I will teach you everything. It'll be very easy. So what they tend to do is emphasize benefit and don't really talk about the cost, right? So you can look at, like, let's say, a fitness influencer. And all these fitness influencers will have, like, you know, web pages or Instagrams or whatever where they're like looking super swole, and they'll say, like, oh, I've developed some secret technique that will teach you some secrets about humanity that the EMF and the big pharma and the food industry don't want you to know. And if you do this, you'll be able to look like me. Whereas if you really look at, like, if you want to get in shape and you want to look like those fitness influencers, really what you need to do is go to the gym 4,000 times. You need to work out for like 5 years in a row, 10 years in a row, and then you will look like that. But the problem is that doesn't sell, right? The only real hack, there is a fitness hack to be honest, but there's a really good fitness hack. The problem is that it's like anabolic steroids injecting your blood with like growth hormone and shit like that. Like that's really the only fitness hack we have on the planet. Everything else is hard work. The problem is that when we look at fitness influencers or other kinds of influencers, other kinds of self-help gurus, what they sort of do is emphasize the benefit. And when I say when we fall into this category too, maybe we'll get into why that is. So they're always talking about the benefit. So the problem here is that anytime they tell you to do something, there's an expectation of a gain and a lack of emphasis on the cost. Now, this fundamental proposition that they make is actually probably the biggest problem with why self-help doesn't work. If we want to understand why implementing self-help is so hard, this I think is the best resource for it. So this is a book on motivational interviewing, which is an evidence-based technique that gets people to sustainably change their behavior. It's one of the most important tools in my tool belt when I'm working with someone with an addiction. So if you think about an addiction, this person wants to quit the substance or behavior, but then they're also drawn to the substance or behavior. So if we look at fundamentally, like anytime human beings want to change, they don't just want to change and they want to stay the same at the same time. So the problem with self-help is that they basically offer us, they have this idea of a gain over here where you are happy, but they don't really think about the cost. And then when you start to implement some kind of change, when you start to implement whatever the self-help guru tells you to do, you run into a problem. So all of them involve being simultaneously pushed or pulled in at least two opposite directions. The more you move toward one choice, the clearer its disadvantages become, and the more its opposite appeals, right? So let's think about what that sentence says. So when you are given advice by a self-help guru, you are over here, and then you envision your happy self, right? Here's the value. You're going to be a swolger, right? You're going to be swole like everyone tells you. Like, oh, just do this thing, you're going to be swole. But you're not really aware of the cost. Now, as you start moving in this direction, the cost actually increases, right? Every time you work out, you were looking at being super swole, but when you actually go to the gym, you don't feel good, you feel nauseous, you feel embarrassed, you feel like you have all of this, you have so far to go, you're never going to get there, you always give up. All of this negativity arises. And then here's the other problem. When you actually go to the gym, right? So here's the happy you that you're moving towards, and now the cost is increasing. Playing video games becomes more appealing. Oh, I'll just work out at home, right? So the closer you move towards your goal, there's almost this rubber banding effect where the closer you move towards your goal, the more you actually want to move in the opposite direction. And this is the crux of the problem, is that the self-help gurus will focus on the benefits, but not focus on the costs. And why do we do that? Because we are living in an attention economy where if we sort of tell you, hey, this kind of thing probably won't work for you, and it's going to take you basically, if you want to get into shape, work out for 4,000 days in a row. Like if anyone says that, that's probably the safest, easiest way to get healthy, but no one is going to click on that. Everyone already knows that, right? So there's the tricky thing is that the most important solutions are kind of known to everyone. Now let's think a little bit about how the OG guru is different, and then we'll get to some neuroscience, which is really fascinating. Here's how the OG guru works. They'll tell you go to an ashram, right? You go to a monastery, where I spent 7 years doing. So the guru comes up to you and says, here's a bag of rice, and you're like, okay. And then they take the bag of rice and they toss it out onto the floor. So the rice goes spilling everywhere. They give you a pair of chopsticks. They're like, pick it up. And I'm like, what? So I start picking up the chopsticks kind of one grain at a time, right? And then I fill up the thing and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm training in something. This is like, I guess there's some secret technique here. And I go give the guru the bag of rice. He's like, good job, takes the rice, dumps it out. He's like, do it again. I'm like, what? And so I'm like, okay, fine, I'm gonna do it again. This is what the guru tells me to do. So I do it a second time, do it a third time. This goes on not just 2-3 times, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And then I'm here to learn meditation. I'm here to learn yoga. I'm here to transform myself. And this guy, all he ever does is takes the rice, dumps it out every single day and tells me to pick it up with a pair of chopsticks. So this is how gurus work, because on the path, if you're working with a guru, the most important thing is this concept of surrender, okay? So when you go to a guru, you're supposed to surrender. You're supposed to do whatever they say. They don't care about who you are. They don't care about how much money you make. They don't care about how you feel. They don't care about what you want. They don't care about your goals. They don't care about any of that stuff. They tell you to do something. When they say jump, you are supposed to jump. But there's something, a huge problem with this is that this is exactly why people open themselves up to abuse. This is why the gurus get in trouble. Because when you have a bunch of disciples who are doing exactly what you say, you have to be incredibly spiritually powerful in order to not give into the temptations of taking advantage of those people. The other problem with the OG gurus is that many of them are what I would call false gurus. They haven't gone through the level of spiritual training, but since the tradition demands surrender, they're like, sweet, I'm going to be a mega guru, I'm going to everyone surrender to me, turn over their bank accounts, and I'm going to get to do whatever I want to. And then they do all kinds of psychological gymnastics to justify the abuse that they keep on their disciples. But let's forget about all that and go back to how this actually works. If we want to understand why this is so effective, okay, we have to understand how behavior happens, how we take action. You have an action that you're thinking about taking, and your brain has all of these circuits that are influencing whether that action happens or not. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are the frontal lobes. These things are responsible for planning and executing long-term goals, right? So these people like doctors who are like, when I'm 16 years old, I decide I'm going to be a doctor. And then I have a goal that for the next couple of years, I'm studying really hard on my college entrance exams. I'm working really hard in college. I'm pre-med, I get a 4.0, I take the MCAT, then I apply to med school, then I go through med school, then I go to residency, then I'm a surgeon in one of the top programs. I spent 5 years doing that. So there's some people who are capable of, at the age of 16, deciding that they want to be a surgeon and spend 2, 6, 10, 15 years moving towards that goal, and then they end up as a freshly minted surgeon, and they've succeeded in their goal. They've been focusing on that for 15 years. So the frontal lobes are also where a lot of our shoulds come from. So we know that we should be working out, eating healthy, maybe working on this coding certification, maybe polishing up our resume, maybe networking a little bit more, right? So this influences our action. The problem is that we have other things that influence our action as well. So let's take a look at our emotional circuitry. Right? So if I feel anxious, instead of talking to people and tolerating it, I pull out my cell phone. If I'm feeling ashamed of myself, I won't go to school. I literally had that problem. I skipped, 3 days of Spanish class because I was playing too many video games. And then like on day 4, you feel stupid just walking in, right? Like you just missed 3 days. People are gonna ask you where you were. You don't want to lie. Do I pretend to have a cough? Like these are the kinds of thoughts that I used to have. And then 4 days go by, and then day 5 becomes harder. And now that you missed 1 week, catching up after on day 6, next Monday becomes even harder. So every day that goes by, the shame increases and it becomes harder and harder and harder to fix it. So we have emotional circuitry that influences our actions. And then we have, this is a super simple diagram, we have our dopaminergic circuitry, like our nucleus accumbens, which also influences our actions. So the nucleus accumbens is what gives us a sense of pleasure and motivation, right? So this is where like, when I play a video game, I want to play it again. So these are the 3 things within you that basically fight over determining what kind of action you take. Now, how do we decide who wins? So this is where I want y'all to understand a very simple principle of neuroscience. Whatever you practice gets better. So if I practice writing, for example, writing cursive over time, I will get better. If I practice headshotting people in an FPS, I will get better at that. Whatever your brain, the more reps your brain does, the stronger that neuronal wiring becomes. That's how things become easier for you. So let's take a look at what we're practicing in our day-to-day lives. So right now, let's start with this idea that all 3 of these circuits have an equal influence, okay? So they sort of have an equal amount of stuff going into in influencing our behavior. When I do something fun, right? So when I play a video game, what does that actually do? It strengthens the connection between the nucleus accumbens and my final behavioral decision making, right? So I'm sort of expanding it. You can think about it like a pipe. And now I've strengthened this. And so now the dopaminergic circuitry is controlling more of my behavior. I've activated my dopaminergic circuitry. I played a video game once, then I want to play it again, then I want to play it again. So what I'm actually doing is I'm increasing the size of the nucleus accumbens effect on my overall behavior. This is also why people fall into problems like polysubstance use, right? So we think about addiction as a genetic predisposition. Oh, alcoholism runs in my family, so I'm prone to alcohol addiction. But if you look at a lot of people, the majority of the people in the world today, they're not just vulnerable to alcohol, they're polysubstance addicts. We're not just vulnerable to marijuana, we're vulnerable to marijuana and video games and pornography and alcohol, right? So we're vulnerable to all of this stuff. Why is that? How can we be vulnerable to all of these things?
So
Do we have a genetic predisposition to all of them? Absolutely not. Each time we engage in these things, we are essentially practicing letting our dopamine control our behavior. There's also what we see in addiction, right? The more that you use, the harder it gets to quit. The more it influences your life. But it's not just dopamine. We can also look at our emotions. So if I'm socially anxious, and I let that behavior control me, and I'm at a party and I go to the corner and I pull out my phone, what am I essentially doing? I'm increasing the effect of emotions on my behavior. So now that I gaze into my emotions, right, I'm letting that activation dictate my behavior, and as a result, what happens? The impact of my emotions on my behavior actually increases. So kind of like I'm strengthening the connections between my emotional circuitry and what ultimately my action circuitry looks like, right? So now the more that I do these things, the stronger the effect they have on the action I'm taking. So this is where the self-help problem becomes actually super important. So when people offering self-help, what are they doing? They're actually appealing to the dopamine. They're appealing to reward. They're saying, hey, this is a thing, you end up trying to use that. Or if you're listening to someone like, a pickup artist who's saying you can socialize, they're saying, hey, you take my course, we will teach you how to socialize and be really good at things. The problem is that they're actually doing is they're appealing to your emotional circuitry and your dopamine circuitry. They're talking to you all about the benefit. And since our circuitry is all inclined this way, we're going to come into these things with this expectation that we will get some kind of benefit. Now here's the problem. Okay, so let's say if you do
I think the craziest thing about you
stock analysis course and you will
is
make
that you
money.
thought you were going to go back to your TV show
You sign up for the course,
after
and then there's a
calling
problem.
your
As you engage in these
boss
actions,
a Jew.
you don't instantly become successful, right? You don't become successful overnight.
If people got to keep their jobs after calling
and since
their
you have a
boss
gigantic
a
fight which has very little flowing through it,
Charlie,
then you don't engage in the action.
then
because it's not
everyone
actually
would
triggering
do
action
it.
because the dopamine signal they promise you all this stuff and they deliver very well, which is why they just multi-billion-dollar self-help.
Yeah, I think
If they delivered, then you wouldn't need them anymore, right? So this is what I've seen as a psychiatrist. I work with most of my patients for 12 to 18 months at a time. That's kind of the average, right? Some people are a little bit less, but 6 months, 12 to 18 months. And why is it 12 to 18 months? Because we're done. Well, they figured out what their conflict is with their mom. They've learned how to set boundaries. They figured out what the problems are with the way that they date people. They figured out how to be more assertive. They conquered their anxiety. So we're kind of done and they move on. But what happens in self-help industry is that you have a circuitry that's already primed to benefit. They deliver very little benefit, and then your motivation is not there because these are the two circuits that are actually controlling your actions. Now, let's look at the behaviors. Let's look at the right. Throw it on the ground, just pick it up. How do you respond to it? So the first thing that happens is you get angry. You get a lot of negative emotion coming in saying, no, I don't want to pick it up, right? And there's also an aspect of ego here. And then, so then you have a choice, right? So in the group, they're looking at you do what's part of it. Like I said, I'm going to do it. So you do it once, okay? And then so what happens is anger within you is telling you, don't listen, don't do it. But you control that anger, you use your frontal lobe, and you end up acting anyway. So when you feel angry, and you restrain that anger, and there's no benefit, there's no point to doing this, right? There's no benefit for you. How is this going to change your brain? So this is going to strengthen your frontal lobe, and you will actually shrink your emotional circuitry. Each time you do this, what's happening? You started out this way, right? Because you came in from all
The
this
U.S., eggs are only sold in a refrigerator, but everywhere else, from Mexico to France and Australia, they're always just sitting out in the store at room temperature. This is because the U.S. government requires all eggs to be washed and sanitized to remove dirt, bacteria, and reduce the risk of foodborne illnesses like salmonella. But here's the catch, this process also strips off the eggs and forms a layer called the cuticle. Now, this is done to protect the safety of the public food supply and protect public health, but because washing also removes the natural protective immunity of the eggshell, well, it makes the eggs more susceptible to contamination later. So to keep them safe, the U.S. refrigerates them. But in every other country, they don't wash their eggs, they leave